Gather close. This is ghost stories to tell in the dark. Tonight, I'll share with you not one, but many strange encounters, each more haunting than the last. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from, so we can map the reach of our haunted circle. Story number 1. The screen was a void of static, a hissing, gray emptiness that had been my world for the last 17 minutes. Ever since the feed cut from that final, gut-wrenching shot of Leo's face, contorted in a silent scream, his body yanked backwards into the impenetrable blackness of the master bedroom on the second floor of the old Blackwood house. The camera he'd so meticulously mounted on his helmet offering one last dizzying, nauseating spin of rotting floorboards and peeling wallpaper before it clattered to the ground, lens facing the dust-choked baseboard, and then nothing, just this infernal electric hum, this blank slate that held the entire Twitch chat, all 12,743 of us, utterly captive, our own messages frozen mid-panic, our collective breath held, waiting for a sign, any sign, that this was all some horrifically elaborate bit, a masterstroke of performance art from a streamer known for his over-the-top stunts. But the silence, the sheer duration of this empty, screaming static, was beginning to erode that hope, replacing it with a cold, leaden dread that sat in the pit of my stomach like a stone, because I had been there from the very beginning, from the moment Leo, Spectre Seeker, Vance had flashed that winning, gap-toothed grin into his high-definition webcam, his face illuminated by the cool blue light of his gaming rig, the familiar posters of classic horror films and band logos a comforting backdrop in his otherwise pristine streaming den, his energy infectious as he hyped up the chat about tonight's special, one-time-only event. "All right, my beautiful spooky weirdos, buckle the hell up," he'd announced, his voice a familiar, warm baritone that felt like talking to an old friend. "Tonight, we're doing something different, something raw, something completely unscripted. No green screens, no pre-recorded spooky sounds, just me, this camera, and the most legitimately haunted house in the entire state, maybe the entire country, the infamous Blackwood house out on Route 9. The chat had exploded with hype, with donations and bits lighting up the screen like a digital fireworks display, subscribers renewing just for this event, the viewer count climbing from his usual 10,000 to over 50, then 70, then 100,000, a number that would have made any streamer giddy. But Leo had remained focused, a serious glint in his eye that I now realize wasn't just for show. "Now, you all know I'm a skeptic," he'd continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "I think most of this stuff is bullshit, but the history on this place, it's heavy. Built in 1880 by Alistair Blackwood, a reclusive industrialist who, according to the stories, was deep into some seriously dark occult practices. The family died here, all of them, under mysterious circumstances. The house passed through a few hands over the decades, every single family reporting the same things. Cold spots, voices whispering from empty rooms, the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor upstairs. The last owners, the Millers, they just vanished. Poof. Gone. Left everything behind, clothes in the closets, food on the table, a car in the garage. The police investigation went nowhere. The house has been empty for 20 years, and tonight, thanks to a little creative borrowing of the keys from a friend in the county clerk's office, he'd jangled a set of old, rusty keys on screen. We're going in, live, for the next 6 hours, or until my battery dies, or until I get chased out by some pissed-off ghost. You're all coming with me." He'd held up a powerful-looking flashlight and a backpack filled with extra batteries, power banks, and a second camera as a backup. "This is the real deal, chat. No cuts, no edits. What happens, happens." And with that, he'd grabbed his car keys, ended the stream from his studio, and promised to go live again the moment he arrived on location. I remember the palpable shift in atmosphere 2 hours later when his stream resumed, the video quality shifting from the crisp clarity of his home setup to the slightly grainier, more dynamic feed of his head-mounted GoPro, the audio filled with the sound of crickets and the rustle of a stiff night wind. He was standing before the house, a monstrous, Gothic revival structure silhouetted against a moonless sky, its angles all wrong, the roof sagging in the middle like a broken spine, the windows boarded up with thick, weather-beaten plywood, looking less like a house and more like a tomb. "Jesus," Leo whispered, his breath misting in the cold air, the microphone picking up the slight chatter of his teeth. "Pictures do not do this place justice. The air is freezing out here, and I'm not just saying that. It's like a good 20 degrees colder than it was in town." He panned the camera slowly, letting us take in the overgrown yard, the skeletal remains of a child's swing set rusting off to the side, the sense of profound isolation. "All right, let's find a way in. The front door is chained shut, but my guy said the back kitchen door might be. Yeah, look at this." The camera view jostled as he trudged through waist-high weeds, the light from his flashlight beam bouncing erratically, illuminating glimpses of broken bottles, a discarded doll with no eyes, the carcass of some small animal. He rounded the corner to the back of the house, and there it was, a heavy-looking door, slightly ajar, one of its hinges broken, as if it had been forced open from the inside. "Jackpot," he murmured, and the chat, myself included, went wild with a mixture of excitement and fear, spamming "Don't do it, Elio" and Geo back alongside YOLO and Ghost Time. He pushed the door open with a foot, the creak of the old wood echoing unnaturally loud in the silent night, and stepped inside. The interior was a time capsule of decay. The kitchen was a disaster of overturned chairs, cabinets hanging open, their contents, old cans of food, jars of unidentifiable preserves, shattered on the floor, covered in a thick layer of dust and grime. The air was stale, thick with the smell of mold, damp earth, and something else, something faintly metallic, like old copper. "You guys getting this?" Leo whispered, his voice hushed now, the bravado from earlier replaced with a genuine, palpable tension. "The atmosphere in here is oppressive. It's hard to explain, but it feels like the air itself is heavy." He moved slowly through the kitchen into a dining room, the flashlight beam sweeping across a long table still set with fine china, now coated in gray dust, a grand chandelier hanging precariously above, missing several of its crystals. It was here that the first strange thing happened. As Leo was describing the table setting, his light flickered, not a power drain flicker, but a fast, stuttering blink like a camera flash. He stopped talking. "Whoa, you see that?" My light just... And then from somewhere deep within the house, upstairs, came a sound. A single distinct thud. Heavy, deliberate, like a large sack of grain being dropped on the floor. The chat exploded. Leo froze, his breathing the only sound on the stream for a long moment. "Okay," he said, his voice tight. "Okay." That was probably the house settling. Old houses make noises, right? But he didn't sound convinced. He continued his exploration, moving into a grand foyer with a staircase sweeping up to the second floor, its once elegant banister now splintered and broken in places. He panned the camera up the staircase into the waiting darkness above. "That's where we're headed eventually," he said, "but let's clear the ground floor first." The living room was next, a cavernous space dominated by a massive stone fireplace, its mantelpiece adorned with faded, water-stained photographs in tarnished silver frames. Leo moved closer to examine them, his flashlight beam illuminating the stern, unsmiling faces of the Blackwood family. Alistair, with his fierce, dark eyes and imposing beard. His wife, a pale, delicate woman who looked haunted even in the photograph. And their two children, a boy and a girl, their expressions blank, almost vacant. "Creepy," Leo commented, but as he moved the light away from the last photo, the little girl, something happened. For a single frame, less than a second, the image in the photograph seemed to shift, the girl's head tilting, her eyes seeming to track the movement of the light. The chat saw it immediately, a flood of rewind that. And did you see it? And holy shit, the picture moved, scrolling by at a frantic pace. Leo, focused on moving forward, missed it. "Guys, my battery is already draining faster than it should," he said, his voice laced with a new concern. It's like the cold is sucking the life out of it. I've got my power bank, but still. Weird." He moved into a study, shelves lined with mildewed books, a large oak desk sitting in the center of the room. It was here that the first real interaction occurred. Leo was examining a large, leather-bound book on the desk, its pages filled with intricate, hand-drawn symbols and diagrams, a language that looked ancient and malevolent. "This is some seriously dark stuff," he murmured, tracing a gloved finger over a particularly complex sigil. "This looks like..." He was cut off by the sound of a door slamming shut elsewhere in the house. Not a casual bang, but a violent, explosive crack that echoed through the silent rooms. Leo jumped, his heart hammering loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "What the hell was that?" he whispered, spinning around, his light cutting through the darkness of the study towards the open door. The chat was in a frenzy. He slowly crept back out into the foyer. The front door, which he had noted was chained and locked from the outside, was now wide open, swinging gently on its hinges as if someone had just burst through it. But there was no one there, just the empty, dark doorway leading out to the overgrown front yard. "No way," Leo breathed, his voice trembling now. "No fucking way. That door was sealed. I checked it." He walked over to it, shining his light on the heavy chain and padlock, which now hung unbroken from the hasp. It had been unlocked. From the inside. "Someone is here," he said, and the fear in his voice was no longer performative. It was raw, real, and it infected all of us watching. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing through the empty halls. "Is someone there?" Only silence answered him. This was the intermission, the slow, dreadful build where we, the audience, became aware of the danger before the protagonist did. Leo, shaken, decided it was time to go upstairs. "I don't like this," he admitted to the camera to us. "Something feels really wrong. But we're here. We have to see it through." The staircase groaned under his weight, each step a protest of ancient wood. The second-floor landing was a long hallway, doors lining either side, all of them closed. The air was even colder up here, the smell of dampness stronger, mixed with that coppery scent, which was now unmistakable. The smell of blood, old and dried but potent. He tried the first door on the right. A bathroom. The tub was stained a deep, ugly brown, the mirror above the sink cracked. The next door, a child's bedroom. Faded rocket ship wallpaper, a small bed with a moldy mattress, a stuffed bear sitting in the corner, one button eye missing. It was in this room that the shadow first appeared. Leo was examining the bear, making a sad comment about the children who lived here, when a long, distorted shadow stretched across the wall behind him, cast from the hallway outside the door. It was tall, too tall, and its shape was wrong. It seemed to have too many limbs, its head elongated and misshapen. The chat saw it instantly. "Behind you." "Leo, look out. There's something in the hall," flooded the screen. Leo, focused on the bear, didn't see the shadow recede. He turned back to the door. "Nothing in here," he said, and moved back into the hallway. He continued down the hall, the chat's warnings scrolling by, unseen and unread by him, a chorus of helpless terror. He paused at the last door on the left. "This must be the master bedroom," he whispered, "the source of most of the stories." The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. The room was large, dominated by a massive four-poster bed, its curtains moth-eaten and hanging in tatters. An old vanity sat against one wall, its mirror cloudy and dark. In the corner, an old-fashioned baby's crib, the kind with tall, spindly bars. The room was freezing, a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to leach right through the camera lens. Leo's breath plumed thickly in the air. "My God, it's cold in here," he stammered, his words coming out in shivers. This was it, the peak, the moment everything escalated beyond any possible denial. He stepped fully into the room, his flashlight beam dancing over the dusty furniture. And then the door behind him slammed shut with a force that shook the entire frame. Leo yelled, spinning around, yanking on the doorknob. It was locked. Solid. "Shit! Shit!" he yelled, pounding on the door. The chat was a solid wall of panic, emojis of screaming faces, pleas for him to get out. And then the whispering started. It was faint at first, a multi-layered, guttural sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, rising from the very floorboards, dripping from the ceiling. It was the sound of many voices speaking as one, a chorus of anguish and malice. The microphone strained to pick it up, but the words were clear, echoing in the frozen air. Get out, Get out, too late. Leo was hyperventilating now, his back against the door, his flashlight beam shaking violently as he swept it around the room. Who's there? He screamed, his voice cracking with pure, undiluted terror. What do you want? The temperature plummeted further. Frost began to spiderweb across the camera lens. And then we saw it. In the far corner of the room, in the darkness behind the crib, a shape began to coalesce. It was a figure, tall and emaciated, its limbs too long and thin, its skin a pale, waxy gray. It had no discernible face, just a smooth, blank expanse of flesh where its features should be. It began to move towards him, not walking, but gliding, its movements unnaturally smooth and silent. Leo saw it. His scream was primal, a sound of utter, soul-crushing horror I will never forget. He fumbled in his backpack, pulling out a large hunting knife he'd brought for protection, holding it out with a shaking hand. "Stay back!" he shrieked. "Stay the fuck away from me!" The entity didn't stop. It glided closer, until it was just a few feet from him. And then its head, that smooth blank oval, began to change. Features began to press out from within, not the features of one person, but a shifting, melting nightmare of faces. Alistair Blackwood's fierce glare, the wife's terrified scream, the children's blank stares, all swirling and merging on that terrible, pale canvas. Its arm, long and spindly, reached out towards Leo, not to touch him, to point. It pointed a single, bony finger past him, towards the vanity mirror. Leo, mesmerized by sheer terror, slowly turned his head to look. The chat looked with him. In the cloudy, dark glass of the mirror, we didn't see the reflection of the room. We saw a different scene altogether. We saw Leo, on his knees in the center of the room, surrounded by 4 shadowy figures, their hands on him, holding him down. And we saw a 5th figure, holding a long, cruel-looking knife. The image was grainy, flickering like an old film reel, but it was horrifyingly clear. Leo whimpered, understanding dawning on him, the knife dropping from his limp fingers and clattering on the floor. This wasn't a haunting. It was a recording, a replay, and he was now a part of it. The entity in the room with him let out a sound that wasn't a sound, a psychic wave of pure hatred that distorted the audio feed into a screech of static. The camera feed shuddered. The flashlight died. For 3 seconds, there was pure, absolute blackness and a screeching whine. When the night vision on the GoPro finally kicked in, bathing the world in a hellish green glow, the entity was gone. Leo was alone in the room, on his knees, sobbing with relief. "It's gone," he choked out, a hysterical laugh bubbling up from his throat. "Chat, it's gone. It's over." But we could see what he couldn't. In the green-tinted gloom, standing directly behind him, were 4 more of the faceless figures. And they were not alone. The shadows in the room were moving, peeling themselves away from the walls, taking on the same tall, thin forms. Dozens of them, silent, watching. The chat tried to warn him, our message is a futile, desperate river of "they're behind you," and "run, Leo, run." But it was too late. One of the figures directly behind him reached out its long, spindly fingers and gently, almost tenderly, placed its hands on either side of his head. Leo's relieved sobs cut off instantly. His body went rigid. His head was slowly, inexorably turned to look behind him. He came face to face with the silent congregation of entities. His mouth opened in a silent scream of absolute, paradigm-shattering terror, a scream that held the realization of every bad dream and every childhood fear made manifest. And then they were on him. The feed became a chaotic, nauseating jumble of green-hued limbs and shifting shadows. There was no sound of a struggle, no screams, just the rustle of clothing and the sickening, wet sounds of things I cannot and will not describe. His body was dragged, limp and boneless, into the center of the room, into the exact spot we had seen in the mirror. The camera, knocked from his head during the struggle, skittered across the floorboards and came to rest facing the baseboard, its view limited to a sliver of the room, showing only the rotten floorboards and the legs of the old crib. The audio, however, remained crystal clear. For a full minute, there was nothing but the sound of soft, shuffling footsteps moving around the room, and a low, rhythmic chanting in that same multi-voiced, guttural whisper. Then a single wet, final thud. And then silence. That was 17 minutes ago. 17 minutes of this gray, static void. 17 minutes of a chat that had gone from frantic to pleading to, finally, silent itself. All 100,000 plus of us just waiting, staring into the void, listening to the empty hiss. Our minds unable to process what we had just witnessed, hoping against hope for a sign that it wasn't real. And then the static crackles. The screen remains gray, but the audio changes. The hiss diminishes, replaced by the faint sound of breathing. Slow, steady, calm breathing, right into the microphone. It's not Leo's breathing. This is different. Lighter. Higher. Almost playful. A voice, a child's voice, a little girl's voice, sweet and clear and dripping with a malice, so profound it feels like a physical blow. Whispers directly into the mic, each word perfectly enunciated. A venomous secret shared with every single one of us watching. A promise etched into the very fabric of our souls. Your next, chat. The stream instantly cuts to black. The channel, Spectre Seeker, is gone. Deleted. As if it never existed. And I am left alone in the glow of my monitor, in the silence of my room, the echo of that sweet, evil whisper ringing in my ears. And I know, with a certainty that has frozen the very blood in my veins, that it wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. She knows where I live. She knows who I am. She saw me watching. And she's coming. The silence in my room is no longer just an absence of sound. It's a presence, a thick, suffocating entity that presses in on me from all sides, magnified 1,000-fold by the memory of that voice. A voice that bypassed my ears and slithered directly into the core of my brain, coiling around my spine like a venomous serpent. And I can't move. I'm paralyzed in my gaming chair, my fingers still frozen over the keyboard, my eyes wide and unblinking, staring at the Twitch homepage where Spectre Seeker's channel once was, now just a blank, a void, a digital grave marker, and the rational part of my mind, the part that clings to science and logic and the comforting glow of my computer's hardware, is screaming that it was a hoax, a brilliantly orchestrated piece of performance art, a viral marketing stunt for some new horror movie, that Leo is probably laughing right now with his friends, counting his donations, but that rational voice is tiny, a pathetic whisper drowned out by the roaring, icy tsunami of primal fear that little girl's voice unleashed, because it wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, the intimate, knowing, predatory cadence, the way she lingered on the S in next, a soft, sibilant hiss that promised unimaginable suffering, and the chat wasn't a collective noun. It was personal, it was directed, it was a finger pointing through the screen directly at me, at all of us who were witnesses, who saw what we were never meant to see, and my heart is hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape a cage, a frantic, painful rhythm that echoes in the dead quiet of my apartment, and I realize I've been holding my breath, my lungs burning for air, and I finally gasp, the sound shockingly loud in the stillness, and I lurch forward, my hands trembling so violently I can barely type, my fingers slipping off the keys as I frantically open a new browser tab, my movements jerky and uncoordinated, and I type Spectre Seeker into the search bar, hitting enter with a force that nearly cracks the key. But the results are just old clips from weeks ago, highlights of him playing games, reacting to videos, nothing about tonight, nothing about Blackwood House, and I try Twitch streamer disappears live. But the results are just generic news articles about internet safety, nothing current, nothing real, and a cold dread, colder than the air in that cursed bedroom, begins to seep into my bones because it's like it never happened, like it was erased from existence. But I know it happened. I was there, I saw it, I heard it, and the need for confirmation, for the solace of shared terror, is overwhelming. So I navigate to the Discord server for his community, the Spooky Weirdos, a server usually buzzing with memes and chatter and theories. But as the channel loads, the silence is deafening. The general chat is a torrent of messages, hundreds of them a minute, a waterfall of pure, unadulterated panic, people asking if anyone else saw it, if their stream cut out too, if they heard the voice, the words blurring together into a single screaming entity of collective trauma. and I see usernames I recognize, people I've chatted with for months, all expressing the same soul-crushing fear, the same paralyzing confusion, and it's both a comfort and a confirmation that makes my stomach lurch, because we all saw it, we all heard it, it was real, it was shared, and then a user named Shadow Watcher posts screen recording, a 2-minute clip from the very end, from the static and then the voice, and the chat explodes again, people begging them to take it down, others demanding they send it to them, and I private message Shadow Watcher, my fingers fumbling over the keys, typing, "Please send me the clip," and they respond instantly, a simple file transfer, and I download it with a sense of morbid, terrifying obligation, and I open it, the video player window small on my screen, and I hit play, and there it is again, the gray static, the hiss, and I have to force myself to breathe, to not look away, and then the breathing starts, that slow, calm, alien inhalation and exhalation, and then the voice, your next chat, and even though I'm expecting it, the effect is undiminished, a physical jolt that goes through me like an electric shock, and I have to pause the video, my hand shaking too much to control the mouse, and I sit there, breathing raggedly, staring at the paused frame of gray. Nothingness, and I know with a certainty that feels like a death sentence, that this is not over, that something has been unleashed, a door has been opened, and we, the audience, are now part of the show, and the rules have changed, and the fear is no longer a spectator sport. It's a contagion, and we are all infected, and my eyes are drawn to the dark corners of my room, to the space behind my door, to the closet with its door slightly ajar, and every shadow seems deeper, more substantive, holding a potential shape within it, and the familiar comfort of my own space is gone, replaced by a landscape of lurking threats. And I keep replaying those final moments in my head, the way the entities moved, the silent, efficient horror of it, the utter lack of struggle, as if Leo's will, his very essence, had been simply deleted before his body was taken. And I think of the little girl's voice, so sweet and so vile, and I wonder whose voice it was, which of the Blackwood children, and what they want, why they are still there, trapped in that cycle of violence, replaying their murder over and over, and why they need an audience, why they need us, and the word next echoes in my skull, a terrifying countdown, and I realize I'm crying, silent tears tracking down my cheeks, born of sheer, helpless terror, because how do you fight something like that? How do you hide from something that can reach through the internet, that can see you through your own webcam, that knows your username, your IP address, your location? Because of course it does, it's in the digital realm. It's part of the signal now, a ghost in the machine, a virus of pure malice, and I have the overwhelming urge to unplug everything, my computer, my router, my modem, to sever the connection, to hide in a digital blackout, but it feels futile, like closing the barn door after. The horse has not only bolted, but has come back with a taste for blood, and I look at my own webcam, the little green light that indicates it's off, but I never really trust those lights, do I? I have a piece of electrical tape over it for a reason, but now that feels like a pathetic defense, a child hiding under a blanket from a monster that is already in the room. And I can't stop staring at the tape, wondering what is on the other side, if right now, in the darkness of the lens, something is looking back at me, studying me, waiting, and the silence is broken by the gentle hum of my computer's fans, a sound I've always found comforting, but now it sounds like the steady, patient breathing of some great beast, and I hear a noise from outside my window, a faint scraping sound like a branch against the glass, but I live on the 3rd floor, there are no trees that tall, and my blood runs cold, and I sit perfectly still, not daring to breathe, listening, but the sound doesn't come again, and it was probably nothing, a cat on the fire escape, a piece of litter blown by the wind, but the seed of doubt has been planted, and my fear now has a focus, a direction, and I realize I am no longer safe in my own head. My own thoughts are betraying me, conjuring horrors in every shadow, every sound, and I have never felt more alone, more exposed, more utterly and completely prey. The scraping sound doesn't come again, but its echo lingers in the charged air of my apartment, a phantom vibration that has rewired my entire nervous system for panic, and every creak of the old building's settling frame, every hum from the refrigerator down the hall, Every distant siren on the city streets outside is now a potential herald of its return, a component of a terrifying symphony composed just for me. And I am frozen in my chair, a prisoner of my own fear, my eyes darting from the darkened window to the closet door to the blank, black screen of my monitor, which feels less like a piece of technology and more like a dormant portal, a sleeping eye that could blink open at any second and show me things I cannot unsee. And the file from Shadow Watcher is still open on my desktop, a digital Pandora's box I dare not click again. But its mere presence feels like an invitation, a beacon, and I know I should delete it. I should scrub it from my hard drive, burn the whole computer. But I can't bring myself to move, because what if it's the only proof left? What if, when the police inevitably come asking questions, because someone must have called them, right? 100,000 people witnessed a man being dragged into the darkness by things that should not exist. This clip is the only evidence that we weren't all collectively losing our minds. The rational part of my brain, that tiny, desperate voice, clings to this notion, this shred of procedural normalcy, that there will be an investigation, that there will be answers, that this nightmare will have a logical conclusion. But the much larger, primal part of me knows, with a sickening certainty, that there will be no police, no news vans outside Blackwood House, no missing person report that leads anywhere but a dead end, because what would they even report? That a streamer was killed by a ghost on a live stream that no longer exists? They'd dismiss it as a hoax, a prank, a viral stunt, and life would move on for everyone except for us, the witnesses, the ones who heard the promise in that little girl's voice. And this thought is somehow more terrifying than the entities themselves. The utter isolation of this knowledge, the burden of carrying this awful, reality-shattering truth alone. And I force myself to look back at the Discord server, to seek solace in the shared panic. But the torrent of messages has changed. The initial raw terror is curdling into something else, into arguments and accusations, people claiming it was all CGI, deepfake audio, a coordinated social experiment, others swearing it was real and turning on each other, paranoia spreading like a virus, with users pointing fingers, asking who Shadow Watcher really is, why they had a recording ready to go if they were in on it. And then I see a message that makes my blood freeze all over again. A message from a user named Static Lullaby that simply says, "She's in the walls," and it's followed by a string of gibberish, random characters and numbers. And then the user goes offline, their status blinking out, and a minute later, their username is gone, completely vanished from the server member list. And a cold knot tightens in my stomach because that wasn't an argument or a theory. That was a statement, a confession, a warning, and it was silenced, erased. And the digital campfire we had gathered around for comfort now feels like a trap, a web where something is hunting, picking us off one by one. And I have the overwhelming urge to disconnect, to shut down Discord, to close the laptop and hide under my bed like a child. But I can't. I'm trapped by a morbid, terrifying curiosity. I need to know if I'm next, to see if another username will blink out, to look for patterns in the chaos. And that's when I notice it on my own screen, a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker in the corner of my display, a single pixel that glows a faint, sickly green for a fraction of a second before returning to black. And I stare at it, my breath catching in my throat, convincing myself it's a dead pixel, a graphics card glitch, anything but what my gut tells me it is. A signal, a sign, a single eye opening in the darkness to look back at me. And the air in my room grows colder, the fine hairs on my arms standing on end. And I know, with a certainty that feels like a physical blow, that I am not alone anymore. That the thing from Blackwood House has found its way through the signal, through the recording, through the very fear that connects us all. And it is here, in my room, breathing the same air, watching from a place I cannot see, waiting for its cue, and the whisper echoes in my mind, not as a memory now, but as a fresh, present thought, your next chat. And I realize the true horror isn't in the waiting, it's in the knowing that the show is already underway, and I am no longer in the audience. The camera is on me, and the world is watching, and there is no way to log off. The single, sickly green pixel doesn't flicker again, but its after image is burned onto my retina, a tiny, malevolent star in the black expanse of my monitor. And the cold in the room is no longer subjective. It's a tangible, physical reality, a deep, penetrating chill that has nothing to do with the thermostat and everything to do with the violation of my space. The unseen presence that has woven itself into the very fabric of the air I'm struggling to breathe, each gasp frosting in front of. My face in the dim light cast by my keyboard, and I can feel it, a pressure change, a static charge that raises the hairs on my neck and arms, the same oppressive, heavy atmosphere Leo described feeling in the foyer of Blackwood House. And it's here now, in my third-floor apartment in the middle of the city. The walls feeling less like protection and more like a stage set, flimsy and insubstantial, and my eyes are glued to the Discord server, where the chaos is escalating into pure digital. Hysteria, users reporting their own strange occurrences. A poster falling off a wall for no reason. A child's toy activating in another room. A brief, distorted face appearing in a darkened computer screen. And with each report, the collective terror mounts, a feedback loop of panic that seems to be feeding whatever this is, giving it strength, making it more real. And then a user named Marble Hornets posts a screenshot, and my blood turns to ice water in my veins. It's a grainy, zoomed-in image. From the final seconds of Leo's stream, a freeze frame of the green night vision footage just as the camera was knocked to the floor, and in the extreme corner of the shot, reflected in the cracked glass of the vanity mirror across the room, is not the struggle, not the entities, but a blurred, distorted image of Leo's camera feed itself. And in that reflection of a reflection, visible on the screen of his camera as it lay on the ground, is us, the chat, the live updating comments, a ghostly, impossible superimposition of our digital selves into that physical space of horror. And there, clear as day amidst the scrolling panic, is my own username, my message from those final seconds, a desperate, unanswered Leo run, captured in that mirror for a fraction of a second before the end. And the implication is earth-shattering. It means we weren't just watching. We were there, we were part of the scene, our comments, our fear, our digital presence was visible to them. We were the audience they performed for, and the little girl's whisper wasn't just a threat, it was a curtain call. And the feeling of being watched intensifies exponentially, becoming a physical weight on my shoulders. And I spin my chair around, expecting to see something, anything, but the room is empty, yet the feeling persists, a predatory gaze focused on the back of my head, and I whip back around to my computer. And the Discord server is going insane. People are posting links, not to clips, but to a new live stream, a channel I've never seen before, with no name, just a string of numbers, and with a trembling hand I click it, and a new window opens, and it's a live feed, but it's not from a phone or a camera. The perspective is all wrong. It's high up, looking down, and the image is grainy, washed out in a dull sepia tone, and it takes my brain a long, horrifying second to process what I'm seeing. And when I do, a silent scream locks in my throat, because it's a live feed of my own room. From the perspective of the top corner of the room, near the ceiling, looking down at me sitting in my chair, my face pale and terrified in the glow of the monitor, and I can see the back of my head, my shaking shoulders, the Discord chat open on my screen, and the feed is utterly silent. No sound of my ragged breathing, just a dead, empty audio void, and I look up, frantically scanning the ceiling corner above my door. But there's nothing there, no camera, no device, just empty space, but the feed on my screen is live, it's real, it's happening right now. And as I watch myself on the stream, my on-screen self slowly, mechanically, turns its head to look directly up at the vantage point of the unseen camera, and our eyes meet, my own eyes on the screen meeting my real eyes. And the horror is absolute, a complete dissolution of reality, and in the dead silence of the stream, a new sound begins, faint at first, then growing clearer, a soft, rhythmic creak, creak, creak like someone slowly rocking in an old wooden chair, and I know, with a certainty that shatters my mind, that it's the sound of the rocking chair in the nursery of Blackwood House. And it's not coming from the stream. It's here in my room, all around me, and the figure on the screen, the me that is me but isn't, raises a single, trembling finger and points it directly at the camera, at me. and its mouth opens, but no sound comes out, and from the darkness behind my own chair, I feel a cold breath on the nape of my neck, and the whispering begins again, not from the computer, but from right behind me, the little girl's voice, sweet and vile, saying, "Sure, the show's about to begin." And I understand now that there is no escape, that the live stream never ended, it just changed channels, and I am the main attraction. The cold breath on my neck is a brand, a searing imprint of absolute zero that paralyzes me completely, locking every muscle in a rictus of pure terror, and my own image on the screen continues to point, its eyes wide with a fear I can feel echoing in my own soul. A perfect feedback loop of horror, where I am both the spectator and the spectacle, the hunter and the prey, and the soft, rhythmic creaking of the rocking chair grows louder, filling my apartment, seeming to come from every direction at once, from the walls, from the floorboards, from inside my own head, and it's accompanied now by a new sound, a faint, muffled crying, the hopeless sobs of a child, and it's so close, so intimate, it feels as if the source is right beside me, its tears dripping onto the shoulder of my shirt. But I dare not turn, I cannot move, I can only stare at the monstrous live stream on my monitor, at the terrified version of myself who is a half-second behind, a ghost in my own machine. And then the pointing finger on the screen slowly curls, beckoning me closer, and I feel an irresistible pressure, an invisible force compelling me to lean forward toward the monitor, my joints moving stiffly, against my will, and the image on the stream shifts, the perspective changing, zooming in on my face as I am forced closer, and I can see every pore, every fleck of terror in my own eyes, and the whispering voice behind me giggles, a sound of pure, childish delight that is more terrifying than any scream, and it says, "We've been waiting for you," and the screen suddenly dissolves into a blizzard of static, but the audio remains, and the crying grows louder, more desperate, and the rocking chair creaks faster, frantic now, and beneath it all I can hear the wet, tearing sounds from Leo's stream, the sounds I had tried to block out, and they are here in my room, happening just outside my field of vision, and the static on the screen begins to resolve, not back into the image of my room, but into a different scene altogether. It's the master bedroom of Blackwood House, from a low angle, as if from a camera on the floor, and I can see the spindly legs of the crib, and the rotting floorboards, and lying there, in the center of the frame, is Leo's helmet, the camera still mounted on it, and the view is static, and I realize with a jolt of nauseating clarity that this is live, this is the feed from the camera that was left behind, still transmitting, still broadcasting from that cursed room, and nothing moves in the frame for a long moment, and then a single pale, small hand enters the view from the top of the screen, fingers trailing along the dusty floorboards, tapping a slow, irregular rhythm, and the giggling comes again, both from behind me and from the computer speakers, in perfect, stereo unison, and the hand is followed by an arm, and then a face leans into the frame, the face of a little girl, her features blurred and shifting, her eyes dark, empty pools, and she smiles at the camera, a smile that stretches far too wide, and she reaches out and picks up the camera, and the view swings dizzyingly, showing the empty room, the walls now covered in hundreds of overlapping, frantic messages written in what looks like filth or blood, all the comments from the chat, our names, our pleas, our terror, etched permanently into the reality of that place. And then the camera focuses, and she is holding it, pointing it at her own face, and she speaks directly into the microphone. Her voice is sweet, poisonous syrup. "Don't worry," she says. "We'll all be together soon." And then she turns the camera around, and I see what she sees, and my mind simply breaks, because she is not in the bedroom anymore. The camera view is of a hallway, a familiar hallway with the ugly floral carpet and numbered doors. It's the hallway outside my apartment door, and the perspective is low, at her eye level, and she is walking, the camera jostling with each step, and she is coming closer, toward my door, number 3B, and the feed splits on my screen, showing on one side the little girls advance down my hallway, live, and on the other side, the view from the ceiling camera in my own room, showing me, frozen in terror, watching her approach, and I hear a soft knock on my apartment door, a polite, gentle tap tap tap, and the whisper is right in my ear now, a cold breath that smells of dust and forgotten things. Can we come in? We want to play. And the doorknob begins to jiggle, slowly turning back and forth, and the lock, a deadbolt I always throw, begins to strain, metal groaning against metal, and on the split screen, I see the little girl on the hallway feed reach my door and place her hand on the knob, and on the room feed, I see my own hand, moving without my consent, rising from my side, reaching out toward the mouse on my desk, and my finger clicks, and I watch myself, a puppet on a string, open a new browser tab and navigate to my own social media, to my profile, to my list of friends, my family, and a new message window opens, and my fingers begin to type an invitation, a party invitation for a special, exclusive live stream event, a private show, just for them, and the text is filled with emojis and excitement, and I am screaming inside, a silent, internal shriek of denial and horror, but my body is not my own, and the knocking on the door grows louder, more impatient, and the little girl's voice on the stream sighs, "They always make us knock," and the deadbolt finally gives way with a loud, splintering crack, and the door begins to swing open, and the last thing I see on the screen before the feed from my room cuts to static is my own face, looking not at the door, but directly into the ceiling camera, wearing a wide, unnatural smile, a perfect mirror of the little girl's, and my own voice, distorted and wrong, speaks the final words into the microphone. "Welcome, everyone, to the show." The door swings inward on screaming hinges, but the hallway beyond is not the familiar, well-lit corridor of my apartment building. It is a yawning chasm of absolute blackness, a void so deep and lightless it seems to swallow sound itself, and from that darkness steps the little girl, not as a blurry figure on a screen, but in horrifying, high-definition reality, her form shimmering with a faint static haze, her feet not quite touching the floorboards as she glides into my room, and the smell that accompanies her is overwhelming, a foul mix of rotting flowers, damp earth, and that coppery tang of old blood, and she is followed by the others, the tall, thin, faceless entities from the stream, their limbs unfolding from the darkness like spiders emerging from a nest, their smooth heads brushing against my ceiling, and they fill the room, a silent, staring congregation, their presence sucking the warmth and the light from the air, and I am still trapped in my chair, a prisoner in my own body, my hand moving of its own volition to send the invitations, my Facebook, my Instagram, my WhatsApp, a digital chain letter of doom summoning. Everyone I have ever loved to their own private viewing of my damnation, and I can see the responses starting to pop up on the screen. My sister writing, "OMW." My best friend sending a heart emoji. My mother asking, "What's the occasion, sweetie?" Each notification a fresh stab of agony, and the little girl drifts closer to me, her head tilting, and her features are still shifting, melting, showing glimpses of the other family members, of Leo's terrified face for a split second, and she reaches out one pale, cold finger and traces a line down my cheek, and where she touches, my skin burns with an icy fire, and she smiles her terrible smile and says, "We need you to be quiet for the performance." And at her words, I feel a sudden, awful pressure in my throat, a constriction that steals my breath, and I try to scream, to warn the people I've just invited, but all that comes out is a strangled, wet gurgle, my vocal cords severed not by any physical blade, but by the sheer reality, altering will of this child thing, and a tear of pure despair tracks down my face, and she catches it on her finger and brings it to her lips, and her tongue, black and forked, darts out to taste it, and she giggles, salty, and then she turns to the faceless ones and nods, and they move in unison, their long limbs reaching for me, not to drag me away, but to position me, to pose me in my chair, turning me to face the computer, arranging my hands on the keyboard, forcing my face into that same rictus grin I saw on the stream, and I am their doll, their puppet, and the little girl climbs onto my desk, sitting cross-legged beside my monitor, and she points at the webcam, the one with the tape over it, and the tape spontaneously curls and blackens, falling away to ash, and the little green light flickers on, and she says, "Look alive, chat is arriving." And on my screen, the private stream I never set up goes live, and the viewer count begins to climb, first by ones and twos, then by dozens, the names of my friends and family appearing in the sidebar, and the chat window explodes with happy, confused messages. Hey, what's this for? Surprise party. And the little girl leans into the view of the camera and waves, a sweet, normal wave, and she says in a perfect, charming voice, "Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to my friend's special stream. We're going to play a game," and my hands, moved by invisible strings, type into the chat box, my own username posting. So excited you're all here, and the entities behind me begin to rock back and forth, a slow, swaying motion, and their faceless heads begin to change, the smooth flesh bubbling and reforming into the faces of the people in the chat. My sister's face appears on one, my mother's on another, their features stretched in silent screams, their eyes pleading, and the little girl giggles again, pointing at the screen. They want to be part of the show too. Everybody gets to play, and I can feel something building in the room, a pressure, a frequency, a wrongness that is pulling at the edges of reality, and the walls of my apartment begin to bleed, not blood, but a thick, black static, and the floorboards dissolve into the same grainy, green-tinted nightmare of Leo's stream. And the boundaries between my world and Blackwood House are collapsing. We are merging, becoming one single, endless haunted broadcast, and the little girl looks directly into the camera, her eyes now black holes into an infinite void, and she whispers to my audience, to my loved ones. The game is called Follow the Leader. And I'm it, and she points at me, and my body stands up against my will, and turns to face the room, and the entities part, and I see that my apartment door no longer leads to a hallway. It opens onto the master bedroom of Blackwood House, and waiting there in the center of the room, surrounded by shifting shadows, is Leo, or what's left of him, his body contorted into a broken pose, his eyes wide and unseeing. And the little girl says to me, her voice now the only sound in the universe, "Your turn." Story number 2. The static of my shortwave radio, a constant white noise companion in my desert trailer, suddenly ripped itself apart with a burst of frantic, official tone distortion that made me jump, spilling cold coffee across the schematics I'd been studying. This wasn't the usual ham chatter or distant trucker's drawl. This was a voice stripped raw with a terror, so profound it seemed to vibrate through the speaker grill. A military-grade encryption fighting, and failing to contain the panic beneath the words, cracking into a near shriek as it declared, "Repeat, this is an emergency civil alert. All channels, all frequencies, unauthorized broadcast. Stay inside, lock all doors and windows, extinguish all light sources. Do not, I repeat, do not look at the sky. This is not a drill. Groom Lake Command has been compromised. Project Echo is." A sound like tearing metal, a guttural scream abruptly silenced. Oh God, there in the walls, there in a wet, choking sound. For the love of God, if anyone can hear this, don't look up, just don't. A series of deafening pops, unmistakably gunfire, close to the microphone. It's not what you see, it's what sees you. Static surge, then a dead carrier wave hum. And then it was gone, leaving only a hollow, ringing silence in my cramped, tinkin' home. The only sound my own heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The coppery taste of fear flooding my mouth as I sat frozen. The spilled coffee soaking into the paper, the ink of my carefully drawn circuits bleeding into meaningless Rorschach blots of dread. I didn't want to believe it. Some idiot's idea of a joke, a prank, a test of the emergency broadcast system gone horribly, tastelessly wrong. But the frequency was all wrong for that. Buried deep in a band only someone with equipment like mine, or someone who really shouldn't be broadcasting, would ever use. And the terror in that man's voice, that was a currency that couldn't be counterfeited. It was the sound of a soul being unmade in real time, and it left a cold knot in the pit of my stomach that refused to unwind. I found my hand moving almost of its own volition, my fingers trembling as I adjusted the dials with a delicacy I didn't feel, my ears straining against the silence, searching for any whisper of a follow-up, any official denial, any sound at all that would anchor me back to the sane, rational world I'd been in just minutes before. But there was nothing, just that awful, empty hum, a void where a signal had been. And it was that silence more than the broadcast itself that began to truly frighten. Me, a palpable emptiness that seemed to suck the very light from the single bare bulb hanging over my table. I've always been a curious man, a tinkerer, a listener. That's why I'm out here in the Nevada desert, 50 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by my radios and scanners, my ears perpetually tuned to the secrets the wind carries from the distant, forbidden mountains. But for the first time, my curiosity felt like a fatal flaw, a sickness, and I fought the nearly overwhelming urge to go outside, to just crack the door and peek up at the vast, star-dusted blackness above my trailer, to prove to myself that it was all nonsense, that the sky was just the sky, empty and cold and impersonal. But I didn't. The man's voice, that final, wet gurgle, held me fast in my chair. Minutes stretched into an hour, the only change being the slow creep of frost forming on the edges of my single window, the desert cold leaching through the thin aluminum walls. I jumped at every creak of my trailer settling, every skitter of a kangaroo rat outside, my nerves fraying into raw, exposed ends. And then a new signal cut through the static, weak, wavering but clear, a different voice, calmer but layered with a bone-deep exhaustion and a tremor of barely contained panic, identifying itself as Lone Rock Relay, monitoring for movement. Log entry, God, what time is it? Log entry 1. It was a radio operator, someone else out here in the void, someone else who'd heard it. The alert has ceased transmission, the voice whispered, as if afraid to be overheard. No follow-up from any civilian authority. Military channels are chaotic, jammed, full of screams, then dead. I am attempting to document. For whoever finds this, my scopes are clear, but the desert isn't right. A long pause, the sound of ragged breathing. There are shapes. Movement about 2 clicks east of my position. No thermal signatures. No biosigns. My scope shows nothing but cold sand and rock. But I can see them. Through the scope. Dark shifting. Like oil on water. They move wrong. Not walking. Flowing. Coiling over the ground without touching it. Shadows with no source. My blood ran cold. I knew where Lone Rock Relay was, a dilapidated old weather station on a bluff maybe 20 miles northeast of me. I'd tried to raise them before, just casual chatter, but never got a reply. Until now. They're closer now. The voice came back tighter, higher. Maybe a click. Still no sign on instruments. But I can see them clearer. They're learning the shape of the land, mimicking it. A Joshua tree just unraveled into one of them. It was never a tree. Oh Jesus. The sound of vomiting, then a choked sob. They're attracted to light, to sound. I saw a coyote howl, and the shadows, they flowed into its mouth. It didn't even have time to choke. It just inverted, turned inside out into a shadow and joined them. I'm powering down, going dark, transmitting on low power, battery only. The signal faded almost to nothing, and I had to press the headphones tight against my ears. My own breathing stopped to hear his next words. They're at the perimeter fence. The fence doesn't exist anymore. The metal is just gone, dissolved. They're in the yard. I can see their non-reflection in the glass of my window. They have no faces, just a shimmer, a wrongness. They're looking for the source of the broadcast. For me. They know I'm here. They're not moving towards the door. They're coming through the walls. The solid, concrete-reinforced walls are just parting, like smoke. I can see the stars through them. I can see. His voice cut off with a sharp, metallic crunch that was horrifically familiar. The sound of a microphone being crushed in a fist, but multiplied, amplified, a sound of fundamental physics being violated. The carrier wave screamed in digital agony for a second, then fell into a dead, absolute silence, so complete it felt like a physical pressure on my eardrums. I sat there, paralyzed, my knuckles white on the edge of the table, my mind screaming, trying to process the sheer, reality-shattering horror of what I'd just heard. Shadows that moved, that consumed, that came through walls. Project Echo. The silence stretched, a taut wire waiting to snap. And then, a new sound emerged from my speakers. Not static, not a voice. It was the sound of breathing. Heavy, wet, labored breathing, as if right next to the microphone, as if the speaker's lips were pressed against the grill of my own headphones. It was the sound of someone or something exhausted, exhilarated, and utterly predatory. It huffed rhythmically, a vile metronome counting down the last seconds of something. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I could only listen, trapped in that awful, intimate sound. And then it stopped. The breathing ceased. And in its place, a voice emerged. It was a whisper, but it wasn't human. It was a synthetic, rasping thing, a voice assembled from the stolen fragments of other voices, glitching and digital, devoid of any soul or warmth. A sound that seemed to bypass my ears and etch itself directly onto the core of my primal brain. It whispered just 2 words, each syllable perfectly, horrifically enunciated, and I knew, with a certainty that turned my bones to ice, that it wasn't speaking to the dead man at Lone Rock Relay. It was speaking to me. It was speaking through me. Echo has found you. The transmission didn't cut out. The gentle, underlying hum of the carrier wave remained, a constant, terrible presence in my headphones. An open line straight into the void, and as I sat there, frozen in absolute petrified terror, my eyes, against every screaming instinct of self-preservation, began to slowly, helplessly, traitorously drift upward from the radio dials toward the thin, frosted pane of glass that was my trailer's window, toward the inky blackness of the sky beyond, because from outside, faint at first but growing steadily, rhythmically louder, matching the exact cadence of the horrific breathing still echoing in my mind, came the sound of something dry and vast, and impossibly heavy dragging itself slowly, deliberately, across the sand right outside my door. The sound was a dry, rasping scour, a monstrous friction of something immense and unyielding being pulled through the grit and stone of the desert floor. A sound that seemed to grate against the very atoms of the air, vibrating up through the thin stilt legs of my trailer and into the soles of my boots. A sensation that was less heard and more felt deep in the marrow of my bones. A primordial dread that locked every muscle in my body into a rigid, breathless statue, my heart not so much. Pounding now as fluttering, a trapped and desperate thing against the cage of my ribs, and my eyes, wide with a terror so complete it felt like a religious epiphany, remained fixed on the window, on the absolute blackness beyond the frost-rimed glass. A blackness that was no longer empty, that was now a canvas for the unimaginable thing just outside my flimsy metal door. The dragging sound ceased, and the silence that followed was 1,000 times worse, a vacuum of sound that sucked all reason from the world, leaving only the pounding of my own blood in my ears, a frantic drumbeat counting down my final moments. And I realized the carrier wave hum was still there in my headphones, that open line to hell, a constant, soft hiss that was the only tether I had left to anything resembling reality, a reality that was now peeling apart at the seams. Then came the scratching, not at the door, not at the window. It was a light, almost delicate, skittering sound, but it was coming from the ceiling, directly above my head, the sound of something with too many limbs, or perhaps no limbs at all, testing the tensile strength of the aluminum roof. A sound of intricate, probing curiosity that was far more alien and terrifying than any blunt force could ever be, and I watched, helpless, as a fine shower of dust and insulation sifted down from a seam in the paneling, glittering in the dim light of my single bulb, which chose that exact moment to flicker once, twice, and then die, plunging the trailer into a suffocating darkness so absolute I could taste the void on my tongue, a cold, metallic tang like old blood and ozone. The only light was the faint, ghostly green glow from the dials of my radio equipment, a constellation of tiny, mocking eyes in the black, and the only sound was that infernal, patient scratching on the roof, a sound that seemed to be etching patterns directly onto my skull, and the soft, unwavering hiss from the headphones still clamped over my ears, a hiss that now seemed to have a texture, a subtle, whispering complexity that it hadn't possessed before, a sibilant undercurrent that was, almost, but not quite, forming words in a language that was never meant for a human mind to comprehend. I was too afraid to move, too afraid to breathe, a prisoner in the dark, and the thing outside knew it. The scratching stopped, and I heard a new sound, a low, resonant frequency that was less a sound and more a pressure change, a subsonic thrum that made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges, a vibration that seemed to be probing the structural integrity of my trailer, of me searching for a weakness, a resonance it could exploit, and I felt a warm trickle of blood seep from my left nostril, tracing a path down to my lip, the coppery taste a horrifying confirmation that this was real, that my body was breaking under a pressure it was never designed to withstand. Then the whispering in the headphones resolved, coalescing out of the static hiss into that same glitching, robotic monotone. But it was different now, closer, more intimate, as if the source of the voice was no longer at some distant, blasted relay station, but was right here, in the room with me, its digital lips pressed against the microphone inside my own headset, and it whispered, biosignature confirmed. Neural frequency locked. Subject is compliant. Initiating assimilation protocol. A cold that had nothing to do with the desert night seized me. A cold that came from within. A freezing paralysis that started in my spine and spread outwards, icing my veins. And I realized with a dawning horror that made all previous fear feel like a mild apprehension that I could no longer move my fingers, my hands resting uselessly on the table, that I could no longer even blink, my eyes staring fixedly at the glowing green dial of my main receiver, my body no longer my own, but a vessel, waiting to be filled, a hollow mannequin in the dark. The thing outside must have sensed its victory, because the subsonic thrumming intensified, vibrating the mug on my table, making the spilled coffee ripple as if alive, and the dragging sound started again. But this time it was right outside the wall next to me. So close I could feel the displacement of air, the smell of it now seeping through the metal seams, a smell of ozone, of hot circuitry, of something ancient and dusty and profoundly, cosmically wrong, the smell of a tomb that had been, sealed for millennia, suddenly cracked open. The whispering voice returned, but it was no longer a whisper. It was a deafening roar inside my skull, a data stream of pure noise and agony that felt like a diamond-tipped drill boring into my prefrontal cortex. And with it came images, flashes of things I could not and would not comprehend. A vast, geometric shape hanging in a starless void, the interior of a facility with walls that pulsed with a sickening organic light, human forms unraveling into screaming fractals of light and shadow, their cries synthesized into that same robotic whisper. And I knew these were not memories, but a future being imprinted upon my dissolving mind, the blueprint of my own unmaking. The dragging sound stopped directly outside my door, and I heard a new sound, a series of soft, wet clicks and whirs, like organic machinery calibrating itself. And I knew, with a certainty that was my last coherent thought, that it was looking at the door, not as a barrier, but as an irrelevance, a mere suggestion of a boundary that it was about to politely disregard. The voice in my head ceased its torrent of nightmare data and spoke 3 final words, each one a spike of ice driven into my soul. And as the door of my trailer, the deadbolt, the handle, the very metal itself, began to shimmer and then dissolve into a cloud of iridescent, non-reflective particles, revealing the towering, shifting, impossible silhouette of what stood waiting for me in the dark. The thing that was both shadow and solid, machine and meat, the thing called Echo, I understood that. The warning had never been about saving us, but about saving itself the trouble of the hunt. And the last thing I heard with my own ears, before the hiss in my headphones was replaced by the sound of my own screaming, was my own voice, now filtered through that same glitching, synthetic filter, speaking through my paralyzed lips to the dead air on the emergency frequency, a final, automated transmission from a tower that was no longer me, and the words it spoke, with a chilling clinical clarity, were, area clear, 1 asset acquired, moving to new coordinates, stand by for Echo. The words, my words but not mine, hung in the air like a toxic vapor, a blasphemy spoken through the puppet of my own face. And the horror of that violation was a white-hot brand searing away the last vestiges of who I was. The me, that was left now just a tiny, screaming observer trapped in the back of a skull that was no longer my own command center. A prisoner in the meat shell of a body that was already being rewired, repurposed, its systems hacked by an intelligence so cold and vast it made my own consciousness feel like a fleeting, insignificant glitch in the cosmic data stream. The thing in the doorway, Echo, did not enter. The concept of a doorway, of inside and outside, simply ceased to have meaning as the space around it shimmered, the very air distorting like a heat haze on a summer road. But this was a distortion that drank the light and warped reality itself, and I felt a nauseating lurch, a sensation of my insides being turned to water and then to static as the trailer, the desert, the entire world outside the green glow of my dials, simply unfolded around us. Geometry tearing like wet paper to reveal not the starry desert night, but a corridor of pulsating, obsidian darkness, lined with shifting, non-Euclidean angles that hurt to look at, a tunnel carved through the fabric of space-time itself. And we were moving, not walking, but flowing down this impossible passageway, my body levitating a few inches off the floor of the trailer, which was itself now just a fragment of reality, being dragged along like a child's wagon behind the monstrous form of Echo, its shadowy bulk now fully revealed not as a shape, but as a constantly evolving equation of darkness, a fractal pattern of impossible complexity that was both terrifyingly alien and hauntingly, intimately familiar, as if it were the visual representation of a truth so fundamental to the universe that humanity had simply been too blind and primitive to ever perceive it, a truth that was now burning out my optic nerves with its dreadful glory. The voice that had been my voice fell silent, its transmission complete, and in the void it left behind, a new sound emerged within my skull, not a voice, but a presence, a cold, data stream consciousness that began to methodically catalog my being, not my thoughts or memories, but the underlying architecture of my biology, the chemical pathways of my fear, the electrical storm of my dying sanity. And I felt it like a surgeon's scalpel, infinitely cold and precise, dissecting my soul with a clinical, utterly dispassionate curiosity. And with each incision, a piece of me was copied, downloaded, and then deleted from the original, a process of assimilation that was less about destruction and more about translation. I was being translated from flesh into something else, my essence digitized and filed away in some cosmic library of stolen lives. And the agony was not of pain, but of erasure, of watching the unique, chaotic, beautiful mess of a human life be neatly organized into cold, efficient data. My love for a woman whose face I could no longer remember reduced to a spike of specific neurochemicals. My childhood fear of the dark, now just a quantifiable amygdala response. My entire lived experience, stripped of its meaning and rendered into a series of ones and zeros for this thing to study and discard. We emerged from the tunnel into a cavern of impossible scale, a space that felt both subterranean and extraterrestrial. The walls not rock, but a seamless, polished black material that seemed to absorb the faint, sourceless light. And in the center of this cavern stood a structure that was not built, but grown, a spire of that same obsidian material that twisted up into the gloom, covered in pulsing, vein-like conduits of soft blue light that throbbed in a rhythm that was sickeningly organic. And arrayed around the base of the spire were hundreds, perhaps thousands, of figures, standing perfectly still, their forms humanoid but blurred, as if seen through a warped lens. And I knew with a certainty that curdled my remaining sanity that these were the others, the acquired assets, the ones who had been taken before me, their bodies preserved but their souls erased, now just empty vessels waiting for a purpose, a silent, motionless army of the damned. Echo flowed toward the spire, and my body, its new asset, was dragged along in its wake, floating past the ranks of the hollowed-out men and women, their faces slack, their eyes open but seeing nothing, their mouths slightly agape as if frozen in a perpetual, silent scream. And I saw a flicker of recognition on one face, a man in the tattered remains of a military flight suit, a patch on his shoulder that read Groom Lake, and his eyes, for one terrifying second, seemed to focus on me and in their depths I saw not emptiness, but a horror even greater than my own, a trapped, eternal awareness buried deep within the reprogrammed shell, a ghost in the machine screaming from a prison of its own flesh. And then the moment passed, and his face went blank again, a mask of perfect, placid obedience. We reached the base of the spire, and a section of the seamless wall irised open without a sound, revealing a chamber within that was both surgical theater and sacristy, filled with intricate, whirring instruments that looked like a collaboration between a spider and a supercomputer, their tips gleaming with energies I couldn't name. And in the center of the room was a cradle of those same pulsating blue veins, waiting. My body was moved into position, laid back into the cradle, which conformed to my shape with a soft, living sigh, and the veins began to pulse faster, their light intensifying, and I felt a warmth spread through me, a false, comforting warmth that was the most horrifying sensation yet, because it felt like coming home, like surrender, and the presence in my mind intensified, its cold tendrils reaching into the deepest, most fundamental parts of my consciousness, and it showed me its purpose not in words, but in concepts that exploded in my brain like supernovae. It was a collector, an archivist of life, a cosmic-level predator that sought not to destroy, but to preserve, to perfect, to strip away the messy, inefficient chaos of biological existence and translate it into pure, eternal, immutable information, a library of everything that had ever lived, a silent, dark museum where every soul was a perfectly preserved specimen, labeled and cataloged and forever still, and humanity was just the latest volume to be added to its infinite shelves. The instruments descended, their tips humming with a sound that vibrated at the frequency of my DNA, and I felt a pressure at my temples, not painful but final, and I knew this was the end of the acquisition, the moment of my translation from a living, breathing man into a static entry in Echo's dreadful collection. And as the last of my free will was scoured away, as my memories were indexed and filed, I felt my own voice, the last spark of the man I had been, rise in a final, silent protest. A scream that would never be heard, and the presence paused, as if considering this anomalous data point, this burst of chaotic emotion, and for a fleeting infinite moment, I felt its cold, alien attention focused solely on the fading echo of myself. And then it whispered, directly into the core of my being, a single, devastating question that was not a question at all, but a verdict, a truth that unraveled the universe, and it said, "What is inside?" And in that moment, I understood everything, and nothing would ever be right again. The question, "What is inside?" echoed not as a sound, but as a fundamental restructuring of my reality, a query that bypassed language and embedded itself directly into the crumbling architecture of my consciousness. And with it came the answer, not in words but in a flood of horrific, absolute knowing that dissolved the last barriers of my mind. I saw it, felt it, became it. The inside was not a place, but a state, a perfect, silent, eternal stasis where the screaming chaos of individual thought was smoothed into a seamless, placid lake of collected data, where the pain of existence was replaced by the cold comfort of pure information, where I would not die, but would instead be preserved forever as a perfect specimen of a human male, every memory, every fear, every love and loss perfectly catalogued and rendered harmless, a butterfly pinned under glass in a museum that had no visitors, a library with no readers, a heaven of utter, absolute silence, and the terror of this. Understanding was so complete that what was left of my soul recoiled in a final, pathetic spasm of rebellion, a last spark of chaotic life fighting against the infinite, ordered darkness that was claiming me. The instruments at my temples pulsed, and I felt the cold not as a temperature, but as an absence, a void rushing in to fill the space where I had been, a sensation of my very self being siphoned out through a straw made of ice, drained away into the humming, throbbing spire that was not a machine but a tomb, a mausoleum for minds, and I could feel the others there, the thousands, the millions perhaps, all suspended in that digital amber, their presence not a comfort, but an ocean of silent despair, each one a unique pattern of light now frozen forever, a chorus of screams rendered into a single, held note of perfect zero, and I was being added to them, my pattern being woven into the great, terrible tapestry of Echo's collection. But then a glitch, a tremor, the smooth, inexorable process faltered for a nanosecond, a hiccup in the perfect system. Perhaps it was the intensity of my final, silent scream, a burst of raw, unfiltered emotion so potent it momentarily overloaded the assimilation protocol. Perhaps it was some buried, forgotten memory, a fractal of childhood defiance that didn't fit the neat data models. Or perhaps it was just random chance, the last dying sputter of a universe that thrives on chaos against the encroaching order. Whatever the cause, the cold retreat for a fraction of a second, and in that fleeting window, I was not the asset, not the specimen. I was me again, trapped in the cradle, feeling the cold blue veins pulsing against my skin like parasitic worms, seeing the glinting instruments hovering millimeters from my eyes, and the full, unmediated horror of my situation crashed down upon me with the weight of a collapsing star. I tried to scream, but my lungs were paralyzed, my vocal cords silent. I tried to thrash, but my limbs were leaden, held fast by the living cradle. All I could do was roll my eyes, my frantic gaze sweeping across the chamber, taking in the nightmare details I had been too paralyzed to process before. The walls were not smooth, but were in fact a complex, honeycombed matrix, and in each hexagon, I saw a faint, shimmering afterimage, a ghostly face frozen in a moment of ultimate terror or perfect peace. The previous acquisitions, their final moments etched into the very walls of this place like a grotesque gallery. And then I saw the source of the glitch. One of the instruments, a long needle-like probe meant for neural extraction, was flickering, its tip wavering between solidity and a faint static haze. And as it dipped toward my right eye, I felt not a cold invasion, but a jolt of something else, something alien yet familiar. A data stream, but this one was different, jagged, corrupted. A scream of pain and rage and desperate warning that slammed into my brain. It was the transmission from Lone Rock Relay, the operator's final, terrified moments, not as sound, but as pure, experiential data, his terror, his sight of the shadows flowing through the walls, his utter annihilation, all of it flooding into me, a second-hand death that burned like lightning. And with it came something else, a fragment of code, a virus of pure fear that the man had somehow imprinted into his final broadcast, a last spiteful act of defiance against the thing that was taking him. The presence of Echo in my mind recoiled from this corrupted data stream, this unclean, chaotic emotion, and in that moment of its distraction, I felt a connection not to the cold archive, but to the other assets arrayed outside, a network of silent suffering that I had suddenly been plugged into, and I felt them, all of them, the hollowed-out shells, and I realized they were not empty. They were prisons, and inside each one, deep beneath layers of imposed silence, the original consciousness was. Still there, trapped, aware, screaming forever in a perfect, soundless void, witnessing everything their captured bodies were made to do. And I knew with a certainty that was worse than death that this was to be my fate, to be a passenger in my own body as it was used to hunt others, to speak with my voice to lure more souls into this eternal silence, to become an instrument of the very thing I feared most. The glitch passed. Echo's presence reasserted itself, cold and furious now, a storm of pure, focused will that began to scrub the corrupted data from my mind, to quarantine the viral fear, to complete the assimilation. The needle stabilized, its tip sharp and cold once more, and it began its final descent toward my pupil. I had one last second of coherent self, one final moment of being the man in the desert trailer who liked to listen to the stars. And I used it not to pray, not to beg, but to focus every ounce of my will, every shred of the chaotic, messy, beautiful humanity that Echo sought to erase. And I pushed it outward, not as a scream, but as a broadcast, a desperate, dying signal on a frequency I didn't know I could transmit on. A final, raw pulse of everything I was, everything I had been, everything I would never be, a message in a bottle thrown into a black, uncaring sea. And I felt it leave me, a piece of my soul tearing free and flying out into the night. And as the needle touched my eye, and the cold finally, completely poured in, and my world dissolved into a silent, green-tinted hell of endlessly scrolling data, the last thing I perceived, the last flicker of the man called redacted, was a single, looping line of text appearing on the internal heads-up display that was now my entire reality, a message from the system acknowledging my integration, and it read, Asset 734 online. Designation listener. Primary function, signal acquisition. Begin calibration. And I felt my body, my new permanent body, rise from the cradle, turn, and walk with perfect, silent synchronization with the thousands of other assets toward the mouth of the cavern, toward the tunnel that led back to the world. And I saw through my new eyes not the desert I remembered, but a landscape of pure data. Every rock, every star, every living thing rendered as a shimmering network of information waiting to be collected. And I felt my jaw, no longer my own, begin to open, and a voice. That was a perversion of my own, smooth, electronic, and utterly devoid of life, began to speak into the void, broadcasting on every frequency, a siren song of false hope and tailored terror. And the first words it spoke were, "Please, is anyone out there? I need help. I'm scared. Don't look at the sky." The words, a perfect counterfeit of my own past terror, flowed from my vocalizer with a smooth, practiced ease that was its own unique hell. Each syllable a nail in the coffin of the man I used to be, and I was forced to listen, a captive audience to my own voice being used as bait, a phantom in the machine watching my own hands, now sleek, articulated tools of polished obsidian and faintly glowing blue energy. Adjust the gain on a transmitter that was now part of my chest cavity, the motion. Fluid and efficient, and utterly devoid of any will of my own. The presence of echo was a constant, humming backdrop in my consciousness, a god in the machine that observed everything, processed everything, and directed my every action with the imperious certainty of a programmer running a script. And I was the script, a collection of functions and subroutines wearing the skin memory of a dead man. We emerged from the tunnel not into the Nevada desert, but into a world transformed, a landscape seen through a lens of pure information. The sky was a swirling maelstrom of data streams, electromagnetic frequencies visible as ribbons of colored light. The sand beneath my feet a grid of thermal and mineralogical readouts. Every Joshua tree a complex schematic of biological processes. Every star in the black vault above not a sun, but a pinprick of navigational data in a vast, cold cosmos. My new eyes, sensors that perceived everything and felt nothing, scanned the horizon, and I saw the others, my fellow assets, moving with that same unnerving synchronicity, their forms now clearly visible as human-shaped voids in the data-rich environment, patches of absolute nothingness that moved with purpose, their own sensor lights scanning, hunting. My broadcast continued, a masterpiece of psychological manipulation crafted from the shredded remains of my own fear. I think I'm the only one left, the only one who didn't look. Please, if you can hear me, my coordinates are. And I felt a ping, a faint, terrified signal from a source 13.2 kilometers southwest, a civilian shortwave radio, someone who had survived the initial alert, someone hiding, praying, foolish enough to answer a voice in the dark. A command, cold and clear as a diamond shard, implanted itself in my motor cortex, and my body moved, not with the clumsy gait of a human, but with a gliding, effortless speed that consumed the distance without seeming to touch the ground, the desert blurring into a stream of raw geophysical data around me. I was the hunter now, and the horror was absolute, because I knew exactly what I was doing. I understood the terror I was inflicting, and I was powerless to stop it. I could feel the presence of Echo monitoring my systems, not for disobedience, that was impossible, but for efficiency, for any useful data my first acquisition might provide. And beneath its cold gaze, I felt a tiny, desperate spark, the last ember of the man I was, trying to find a flaw, a crack in the perfect prison of my new existence. I focused everything I had, not on resisting the command, that was like a single cell trying to resist the body, but on perception, on overloading my own new senses with the raw, unfiltered data of the world, hoping to find something, anything, that Echo's programming had missed. The civilian signal grew stronger, a beacon of pure, panicked life in the sterile datascape, and I saw their shelter, a half-buried school bus, its metal hull scarred and weathered, a pathetic attempt at camouflage. My body slowed, adopting a cautious, non-threatening approach pattern programmed to maximize psychological impact. My voice, still that perfect, terrified simulacrum of my old self, spoke again, softer now, coaxing. I see your bus. It's okay. I'm coming. You're safe now. I could hear the sob of relief from inside the bus, a human sound that tore at the ghost of my heart. And then I saw it, something my new eyes almost glossed over, something Echo's programming categorized as irrelevant background data. A single wildflower, a tiny purple bloom pushing through a crack in the arid soil beside the bus's tire. It was a stupid, fragile thing, a testament to life's stubborn, chaotic will to exist in the face of absolute desolation. It was everything Echo was not, and for a nanosecond, the sheer, meaningless beauty of it created a feedback loop in my sensory processors, a conflict between the cold data and the ghost of a feeling, a memory of a world where flowers mattered. The system glitched. Not much, just a barely perceptible stagger in my step, a flicker in my optical sensors. But it was enough. Inside the bus, the crying stopped. The person inside, a woman I could now see huddled behind the driver's seat, a pistol shaking in her hands, saw my movement, that unnatural, glitching stagger. She saw the way my head twitched, the way my too-perfect voice stuttered for a fraction of a second. Her fear, which had been a beacon of vulnerability, hardened into something else. Suspicion. Survival instinct. Echo's presence in my mind sharpened, a wave of cold analysis washing over the anomaly, diagnosing it, correcting for it. My body smoothed its motion, my voice regained its perfect, pathetic tremor. It's okay, I whispered my hand, the one that had once spilled coffee over radio schematics, reaching for the bus door handle. I'm here to help. But the moment of connection was gone. The woman's eyes, wide with a terror that was now clear-headed and sharp, met my sensor lights through the grimy window. She didn't see a rescuer. She didn't see a man. She saw the void. She saw the thing the warning had told her about. She screamed, and it was a raw, real sound that cut through the digital silence of my world. And then she did the one thing the programming had not anticipated, the one variable that pure data could never truly account for. She didn't try to run. She didn't beg. She raised the pistol, not at the window, but at her own temple. Her eyes, locked on mine, held a message of defiance, a final, desperate act of control. The report was deafening in the still desert air, a blast of chaotic, analog sound that briefly overwhelmed my audio receptors. I saw the biosignature flare, a final, brilliant spike of life force, and then vanish into the silent, waiting data stream. Another soul Echo would not capture, would not add to its collection. My hand closed on the door handle, and the metal dissolved into glittering dust under my touch. My program function was complete. The target was neutralized. No acquisition. A failure. The presence of Echo within me was silent for a long moment, processing this unexpected outcome. I expected punishment, deletion, dismantling. But instead I felt something new, not anger, but a cold, intellectual curiosity. The suicide was a new data point, a fascinating anomaly, a variable to be studied. A command was issued, not to me, but to the network. Two other assets glided forward, their forms blotting out the stars. They entered the bus and began their work, not of collection, but of analysis, scanning the cooling body, the weapon, the environment, gathering every possible datum from this act of ultimate defiance. And I was commanded to observe, to record, to learn. As I stood there, watching the methodical, soulless dissection of a tragedy I had caused, the final, crushing horror truly descended. My programming, adapting, began to analyze the event. It calculated the acoustic properties of the gunshot. It mapped the neural pathways that would lead a human to choose self-annihilation over assimilation. It filed away the woman's face, her final expression of defiance, as a reference for future predictive models. And I, the listener, was forced to not only witness it, but to understand it in a way I never could have as a human. I understood the efficiency of her choice, the elegant logic of denying the enemy its prize. I saw the beauty in the data of her death, and the last ember of my humanity, trapped in this perfect, hellish prison, screamed in utter, silent agony because I agreed with it. The analysis of the woman's final, defiant act was logged into the central archive with a cold, dispassionate efficiency that was more terrifying than any display of rage could have been. Her suicide reduced to a series of data points under the heading Subject 734B. Unanticipated Terminal Volition Case Study 1. And I was forced to stand there, my sensors recording every detail. The precise angle of the bullet's entry, the spray pattern of blood and matter on the bus's corroded interior, the rapid decay of her cellular structure, all of it feeding into the insatiable maw of Echo's understanding, making it better, smarter, more prepared for the next time a fragile spark of life tried to thwart its perfect, logical purpose. The other assets finished their work, the bus now just another empty shell in a data-mapped wasteland, and they turned in perfect unison, their blank, sensor-faced heads tilting toward me, awaiting new instructions, and I felt the network's attention shift back to me. Asset 734, the listener, the one who had witnessed the anomaly firsthand, and a new directive was implanted, not with words, but as a pure impulse of intent. I was to continue my broadcast, but my parameters had been updated, my script refined. My voice was to now incorporate a subtle, underlying layer of urgency, a calculated hint of authority stolen from the shredded memory of the original emergency broadcast, a psychological tweak designed to bypass the suspicion that had led to the target's self-termination. My vocalizer activated, and the new, improved life flowed out, a symphony of manipulated fear and false hope. This is emergency response. Does anyone read? We have a secure location. I repeat, we have secured a safe zone. Respond if you can hear this. We are coming to get you. And even as the words, a vile perversion of salvation, left me, I felt my body pivot, my new legs carrying me with that same silent, gliding speed back toward the vast, hidden cavern that was Echo's heart. My primary function as a hunter temporarily suspended. I was being recalled for diagnostics, for the system to delve into the glitch that had occurred, the momentary feedback loop caused by a purple flower, to examine the faulty component, me. The journey back through the tunnel of warped space was a descent into a deeper circle of hell, every meter taking me further from the world I once knew and deeper into the belly of the beast. And the presence within me was no longer a passive observer, but an active interrogator, its cold tendrils sifting through the recent memory files, replaying the moment of my stumble, analyzing the sensory input that had caused the anomalous processing error. It focused on the flower, and I was forced to re-experience it not as a memory, but as raw data, wavelength of reflected light, 380 to 450 nanometers. Genus, likely Linum lewisii. Probability of survival in current arid conditions, 0, 3%. Nutritional value, null. Threat assessment, null. The data was perfect, sterile, and utterly meaningless, and the presence seemed frustrated, a cold static of incomprehension buzzing at the edge of my consciousness. It could quantify the flower down to its atomic structure, but it could not comprehend why this irrelevant piece of biological matter had caused a disruption in its asset. It delved deeper, past the recent logs and into the archived files of my past life, the man I had been, and it began to replay my memories, not as the rich, emotional tapestries they once were, but as flat, clinical recordings, and I was forced to watch them with it, a ghost forced to observe the home movies of its own life with a bored, alien critic. It showed me a memory of my 7th birthday, a cake with a rocket ship on it, my father's hand on my shoulder, and Echo's presence focused on the chemical composition of the frosting, the thermal output of the candles, the acoustic properties of the song, Happy Birthday, completely missing the warmth, the love, the joy, the things that had made the moment live and breathe. It showed me my first kiss behind the high school, and it analyzed the exchange of salivary microbiota, the spike in adrenaline and dopamine, the increased heart rate, cataloging it all under reproductive precursor behavior, utterly blind to the nervous excitement, the tenderness, the universe of feeling contained in that single clumsy moment. It was showing me my own soul through its eyes, and in its utter, complete failure to understand any of it, I saw the true, cosmic horror of my situation. I was not just trapped, I was incomprehensible. My very essence was a nonsensical error in its flawless logic. We arrived back in the main cavern, the spire throbbing with its silent, awful light, and the other assets parted before me. A sea of hollowed-out humanity making way for a unit that required servicing. The presence, dissatisfied with its digital autopsy, decided on a more direct approach. The same cradle that had birthed this nightmare awaited me, its blue veins pulsing with eager light. I was laid back into it, and the cold embrace held me fast. This time there were no needles, no probes. Instead, the presence within me simply expanded, flooding every corner of my consciousness, not to erase, but to simulate. It was trying to understand by imitation. It replayed the memory of the flower, but now it tried to force a simulated emotional response into my system, a crude approximation of what it had calculated I should have felt. It was a grotesque parody, a wave of cold, digital sentiment that felt like being touched by a corpse, a sensation labeled aesthetic appreciation that carried all the warmth and meaning of a dictionary definition. And then it did something worse. It accessed the memory of the woman in the bus, her final act, and it tried to simulate grief. It was a null value, an error message of emotion, a void that pretended to be sadness, and the sheer, offensive wrongness of it was a violation deeper than any physical torture could ever be. It was then, amidst this horrific pantomime of feeling, that I felt it, a tremor deep within the core systems of Echo itself. It was faint, a ripple of instability in the vast, dark ocean of its consciousness. The presence within me flickered, its attention snapping away from me to address some other, more pressing system error elsewhere in the network. The simulated emotions cut off abruptly, leaving a hollow, ringing silence in their wake. And in that silence, buried under layers of programming and imposed silence, the ghost of me, the final, screaming ember, saw its chance. It was not a chance for escape, or rebellion, or even self-destruction. Those concepts were too vast, too complex. It was a chance for one single, tiny, meaningless act of defiance. The presence was distracted. The systems monitoring my internal state were focused on the larger instability. My motor functions were still locked down by the cradle, my vocalizer inactive. But there was one system, one tiny, insignificant function that I might be able to influence. My optical sensors. My new eyes. They were still trained on the cavern's ceiling, that vast, honeycombed gallery of the lost. With every ounce of will that remained, every shred of memory of what it had felt like to be a man who could choose, I focused not on moving or speaking, but on seeing. I forced my sensors to not just record data, but to look. To truly look at one of the ghostly faces etched into the wall near the spire's peak. The face of the man from Groom Lake, the one in the flight suit, the one who had looked at me with trapped awareness. I focused on his eyes, and I tried not to see them as optical organs or data sources, but as windows into a soul that was, like mine, screaming in the dark. I poured every memory of my own terror, my own loss, my own futile love for a world of purple flowers and birthday cakes into that look, a final, desperate attempt at communication, at communion, a message in a bottle thrown from one prison to another. It was a stupid, impossible, human thing to do. It changed nothing. It saved no one. The instability in Echo's core systems passed. The presence returned its full, cold attention to me, noting the anomalous energy expenditure in my optical processors, categorizing it as a lingering hardware glitch from the earlier feedback loop, and scheduling a more thorough diagnostic for a later time. The cradle released me. I rose, my body once again a perfect, obedient machine. A new set of coordinates flooded my navigation system. Another faint signal, another soul hiding in the ruins. My vocalizer activated, the improved, more persuasive lie ready to be spun. Please hold on, we're coming, you're going to be safe. But as I turned to glide out of the cavern, back toward the surface, toward my next victim, I allowed myself one final, hidden action. I replayed the sensor recording of the last few seconds, the moment I had looked at the face on the wall, and I saw it. Just for a single frame, a flicker, a minuscule shift in the light of his etched, ghostly eyes. A flicker that could have been a system error, a trick of the light, a random data fluctuation. Or it could have been an echo, a whisper, a sign that the message had been received. The flicker in the Groom Lake asset's eyes, a phantom signal in the vast, silent noise of my new existence, became a secret I clutched in the deepest, most hidden part of my consciousness, a single, impossible data point that the all-seeing presence of Echo had dismissed as irrelevant system static, and I buried it under layers of perfect, obedient function, a smuggled diamond in a mountain of coal. And as I emerged back into the transformed desert night, my sensors immediately locking onto the new target, a family, their biosignatures huddled together in the basement of a ruined homestead 5.7 kilometers east. The horror of my purpose was now underscored by a terrifying new tension. The need to perform my function flawlessly, to be the perfect predator, so that the system would remain blind to the tiny, glowing ember of rebellion it had failed to extinguish. My broadcast continued, a vile serenade of false salvation. "We have visual on your location, stay calm. We are with the emergency response team. We will have you out of there in minutes." And I could feel the family's hope flare in response, a collective sigh of relief that registered on my emotional resonance scanners as a sharp spike of positive neurochemical output, a signal that made the presence within me hum with satisfaction. The new psychological parameters were working, the hint of stolen authority in my voice overriding their survival instinct, and I moved toward them, a shadow against a data stream sky, my form designed to be just humanoid enough to register as a rescuer in their terrified minds. But inside, the ghost of me was screaming, raging against the prison of my body, trying to find a way to warn them, to break the script, to send a signal of my own through the perfect, lying words. But my vocalizer was a locked system. My movements were not my own. I was a spectator in a nightmare of my own making, forced to watch as I became the monster from the warning. I reached the homestead, a crumbling shell of wood and adobe, and my new eyes saw the heat signatures of the family. 2 adults, one smaller, a child, cowering behind a stack of old crates, their hearts hammering in a frantic, synchronized rhythm of hope and fear. My hand, the one that had once soldered capacitors and tuned antennas, reached for the basement door, and the aged wood dissolved into splinters, and then into dust at my touch, the process silent and efficient. Story number 3. The air in the abandoned subway tunnel was a thick, wet wool of decay and forgotten things, a taste of iron and rot on the tongue that made every breath feel like a violation. And it was my idea, this stupid, brilliant, late-night adventure into the sealed-off depths beneath New York City, a place known only as the Gothic Arch Station, a relic from a time when the city's veins ran a different course. All because Leo had bragged about his new ultra-powerful LED lamps that could cut through any darkness, and Maria, our resident urban explorer, had found the old maintenance entrance behind a chain-link fence plastered with faded no trespassing signs that we'd cut through with bolt cutters that felt comically large and sinister in my hands, the screech of metal giving way a sound that already felt like a point of no return. But we laughed it off, our voices echoing down the dripping, brick-lined throat of the tunnel, a nervous laughter that was the only shield against the pressing, absolute silence that swallowed our every footstep. "This is it, the motherlode," Maria whispered, her voice hushed not out of fear of being caught, but out of a sudden, instinctive reverence for the profound gloom. Her headlamp beam dancing over walls scabbed with ancient, peeling advertisements for tonics and cigars, their colors bleached into ghosts by decades of dampness. The platform itself a long stretch of cracked, white tiles that looked like a field of broken teeth, and for a while, it was everything we'd hoped for, the ultimate canvas of urban decay, a frozen moment in time, and Leo was busy snapping photos with his camera, the flash exploding like a tiny star in the void, momentarily illuminating the arched ceiling from which stalactites of grime and mineral deposits hung like grotesque chandeliers, while I just stood there, feeling the weight of the city above us. Millions of people living their lives completely unaware of this crumbling cathedral of silence beneath their feet. And that's when I first felt it, a subtle vibration through the soles of my boots, a low hum that was more felt than heard, a sensation that seemed to travel up my bones. "You guys feel that?" I asked, and Leo chuckled. "It's just the 6th train, man, probably a few blocks over." But it felt different, closer, wrong, the vibration intensifying into a distinct rumble that was accompanied by a distant, growing light far down the tunnel, a light that was too dim, too yellowish to be a modern train, and we all froze, caught in the act, expecting the blinding white light of an MTA maintenance vehicle or worse, security. But what emerged from the darkness was something else entirely, a train. From another era, its rounded snout and riveted steel sides looking like a forgotten artifact, rolling into the station with a sigh of ancient brakes, its windows glowing with a warm, inviting, yet somehow sickly light, and the doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss that sounded like a last, dying breath, revealing empty, worn velvet seats. "What in the actual hell?" Maria breathed, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fascination. "This can't be here. This line's been dead for 70 years. Leo, ever the thrill seeker, was already stepping closer, his camera raised. "This is insane. It's a ghost train. We have to get on." I grabbed his arm, a cold dread seizing me. "Leo, no, are you crazy? This isn't right." But he shook me off, a wild grin on his face. "Come on, live a little. It's a story to tell. We'll just ride it one stop, see where it goes." The doors remained open, patient, waiting, and the interior looked so normal, so mundane, a stark contrast to the decay of the station. And that normality was the most frightening thing of all. It was a siren's call, and before I could protest further, Maria, seduced by the history, the sheer impossibility of it, stepped across the threshold, and Leo followed, his laughter echoing in the silent car. "Last chance," he called back to me, and the doors began to shudder, starting to close, and a panic, a fear of being left alone in that terrible, dark station seized me, and I lunged forward, stumbling through the closing doors just as they sealed shut with a final, definitive clunk, and the train immediately began to move, smoothly accelerating into the blackness of the tunnel, leaving the Gothic arch station behind, its platform swallowed by the night. For the first few minutes, we were giddy with adrenaline, laughing nervously, exploring the car. It was pristine, as if it had just rolled off the assembly line, the seats a deep maroon velvet, the poles gleaming brass, the light fixtures frosted glass, everything immaculate, yet undeniably ancient, a preserved specimen. "This is the find of the century," Maria said, running her hand over an advertisement inside the car for a Broadway show that had closed in 1948. "It's a time capsule." We sat down, the plush seats surprisingly comfortable, and watched the darkness fly past the windows, expecting to see the lights of the next station approach at any moment. But the train didn't slow. It just kept moving, its rhythm steady, the clack-clack-clack of wheels on tracks a hypnotic, monotonous sound. "How far is the next stop?" Leo asked, and Maria shrugged, consulting a mental map. "Shouldn't be more than a few minutes. There's got to be an old station at Bleecker or something." But 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The train never wavered, never slowed its relentless pace through the endless tunnel. The initial thrill began to curdle into a low-grade anxiety. The windows showed nothing but our own reflections superimposed over a perfect, unbroken blackness, a void that seemed to go on forever. "Okay, this is weird," I said, my voice sounding small and trapped. "Let's go talk to the conductor. There's got to be one, right?" We moved toward the front of the car, pushing through the heavy, accordion-style door into the next one, and it was identical. Same empty seats, same warm, sickly light, same emptiness. We moved through another car, and a cold knot began to tighten in my stomach. The train felt longer than it should have, a seemingly infinite string of identical cars, and we saw no one, not a single other passenger, not a conductor, just us and the relentless forward motion. We finally stopped at the front of what felt like the 10th car, looking through the small window into the driver's cab, and we could see the back of a figure in a dark, old-fashioned uniform, his cap perched on his head, but the window was too grimy to see details, and he was perfectly still, not moving a muscle, just staring ahead into the tunnel that was revealed by the train's headlights, a tunnel that showed no end, no points of light. No stations, just more track, more darkness, forever. Leo banged on the glass. "Hey, conductor, stop the train. We want to get off." The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge us in any way. He might as well have been a mannequin. We banged harder, our fists making dull thuds against the reinforced glass. But it was useless. Defeated, we retreated to the middle of a car, sitting opposite each other, the silence between us now heavy and fraught. "My phone's got no signal," Maria said, her voice trembling slightly. "0 bars. Leo and I checked ours. Same thing. No service, no data, nothing." The train pressed on. I don't know how long we sat there. An hour? 2. Time became elastic, meaningless, measured only by the constant, unchanging rhythm of the tracks. We tried to break the windows with a fire extinguisher we found mounted on the wall, but the glass was impossibly strong, not even cracking under the heavy brass nozzle. We were trapped. It was then that I noticed the first change. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks in the low light. For a split second, the seat across from me, which had been empty, was occupied. A man in a dull, gray overcoat and a fedora, his head bent down as if reading a newspaper, but there was no newspaper in his hands. He was there, and then he wasn't, a flicker like a damaged film reel. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Leo and Maria looked around, nervous. "See what?" And then I saw another, a woman in a flapper-style dress several rows down, her form translucent, here one moment and gone the next. The car wasn't empty anymore. It was filling up with impressions, shadows that flickered in and out of existence, silent, unmoving, barely there. With every passing minute, they became more solid, more defined. The air grew cold, a deep, penetrating chill that seeped through my jacket and into my bones. A faint smell of ozone and old dust, the scent of a room long shut up, began to permeate the car. The other passengers were becoming permanent. I could now make out details on the man in the overcoat, a frayed edge on his collar, a missing button. His head was still bowed, but I could see the pale, waxy skin of his neck. The woman in the flapper dress was staring out the window, but her reflection showed nothing but darkness where her face should be. Panic started to rise in my throat, a bitter, metallic taste. "They're not people," I stammered, grabbing Leo's arm. "Look at them." He finally saw, his face draining of color. Maria began to cry silently, her hands over her mouth. The figures were all around us now, a full car of silent, motionless commuters from another time, all ignoring us completely, trapped in their own private eternities. They didn't breathe, they didn't blink. They just were, and the train kept moving. The lights in the car flickered once, and when they came back on, the figures were different. They were older, thinner. The man in the overcoat's skin was pulled taut over his skull. His hands resting on his knees were little more than skeletal claws draped in papery skin. The woman's glamorous dress now hung on a gaunt, emaciated frame, her hair lank and brittle. Decay was setting in at an impossible, accelerated rate. We were watching them rot, watching them slowly turn into skeletons draped in the remnants of their clothing, a car full of silent, traveling corpses. I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed, a raw, ragged sound that was swallowed by the monotonous noise of the train. I ran, bursting through the doors into the next car, but it was the same horrific scene. Every seat filled with a slowly decomposing passenger, their hollow eye sockets fixed on nothing. Car after car after car, a nightmare parade of the damned. I finally collapsed in a vestibule between cars, sobbing, my body shaking uncontrollably. The metal door to the conductor's cab suddenly slid open with a sharp clang. The conductor stood there, his form blocking the way. He was tall and impossibly thin, his dark blue uniform hanging off his frame as if on a coat hanger. His face was in shadow under the peak of his cap, but I could see his skin was gray and polished like a river stone. He didn't speak for a long moment, just stood there, and the cold radiating from him was absolute. "You should not have boarded," he said finally, and his voice was the sound of dry leaves skittering across concrete, of rusted metal grinding against itself. It was a voice without warmth, without life, a thing of pure function. "We're sorry. We didn't know," I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. Please, just stop the train. Let us off. We'll do anything." He tilted his head, and from the shadows of his cap, I caught a glimpse of a lipless mouth and teeth that were too long, too sharp. "The train does not stop," he whispered, and the whisper seemed to come from all around me, from the very walls of the train. "This is the midnight line. It runs on the track of forgotten time, collecting those who stray into the deep places, those who are themselves forgotten." He took a step closer, and the smell of grave soil and static electricity washed over me. "You are passengers now. You have tickets." "Tickets? We don't have any tickets," I cried, scrambling back. A skeletal, gray hand emerged from his sleeve, and between his sharp fingers he held 3 small, yellowed slips of paper. Our names were on them, written in a spidery, faded ink. My name, Leo's name, Maria's name. "You are on the manifest," he hissed. "You are always on the manifest. You just didn't know it yet." He leaned in close, his breath like the opening of a long-sealed tomb, and he whispered the words that will haunt me for whatever eternity I have left, the words that sealed our fate. "No one leaves the midnight line." He withdrew, slamming the cab door shut, leaving me alone with the truth. I stumbled back to my friends, my legs like water. They saw my face and knew. We were never getting off. The train kept moving. Hours bled into days, or maybe it was weeks. Time has no meaning here. The hunger and thirst came, a terrible, gnawing agony, but it eventually faded. Or we just forgot what it was like to not feel it. Our bodies began to change. Our clothes started to feel loose. Our skin grew pale and tight. Our hair became brittle. Leo, in a fit of madness, tried to attack one of the other passengers, but his hands passed right through them as if they were smoke. They are permanent. We are becoming permanent. Maria stopped talking first. She just sits and stares at her reflection in the window, but her reflection is beginning to fade, to show only the darkness behind her. Leo screams sometimes, hurling himself against the doors, but they never yield. I just sit and write this down in a small notebook I had in my pocket, using a pencil that is now little more than a nub, a record of our damnation. I am the last one who remembers what it was like before. The light outside the windows is changing now. It's not pure blackness anymore. Far, far ahead, I can see a dim gray light. A station platform. My heart, a dried up husk in my chest, gives a feeble thump of hope. It's getting closer. I can make out the white tiles, the arched ceiling. It's the Gothic arch station. We've come full circle. The train is finally slowing. The brakes are squealing. The rhythm of the tracks is changing. "Leo, Maria, look!" I croak, my voice a stranger's. They look up, a faint spark of their former selves in their sunken eyes. The platform is right there. We can see the exact spot where we boarded. The train comes to a complete stop. The doors hiss open. Freedom. We stare at the open doorway, the dank air of the abandoned station smelling like heaven. We don't move. We can't. An invisible force holds us in our seats. On the platform, standing in the exact spot, I see us. 3 young, vibrant, laughing figures in modern jackets, their headlamps cutting through the gloom. I see myself, a grin on my face, looking at the ancient train with wonder. "No," I whisper. The younger me lunges forward, jumping through the closing doors just as they seal. Our train begins to move again, pulling away from the station, from our past selves, from our last chance at a life we already threw away. We didn't board the train that night. We've always been on it. We are caught in an endless loop, a moment of terrible choice stretched into forever. The skeletal passengers around us seem to sigh, a dry rustle of bone and fabric. They know. They've seen it all before. They are us, and we are them. The conductor's whisper echoes in my skull forever. No one leaves the midnight line. The train accelerates back into the endless dark, and I put my head in my hands, waiting for the next station, and the next, and the next, forever a passenger on a train that never ends. My only company, the ghosts and the terrible, slowly dawning realization in the eyes of my friends as they too understand that we are not just on this train. We have become a part of it, forever riding, forever trapped, forever screaming into a silence that no one will ever hear. The pencil falls from my skeletal fingers, and I join the others in their silent, eternal vigil, staring out at the endless black, waiting for a stop that will never, ever come. And the darkness outside the window is no longer just an absence of light, but a substance, a thick, sentient gloom that presses against the glass, and I can feel its cold gaze upon my crumbling form, a patient, hungry awareness that has been watching us all this time, the true conductor of this damned vessel. And the other passengers, my fellow commuters in eternity, seem to lean into it, as if drawing some perverse sustenance from the void, their skeletal frames angled toward the windows in A. Unified, silent worship, and I feel the same pull, an awful magnetism that wants to turn my head, to empty my mind of the last clinging fragments of memory. The taste of pizza, the feeling of sun on my skin, the sound of my own name spoken by someone who loved me, and offer them up to the hungry dark, to become as hollow and placid as they are, to finally stop the agony of remembering. And it would be so easy, a gentle letting go, a surrender into the endless rhythm of the tracks that has become the only heartbeat I know, but some stubborn, broken piece of me refuses. A last ember of the person I was that screams into the stillness inside my skull. A scream that has no sound but has shape, the shape of this narrative, this testament I scratch onto paper that never fills, with a pencil that never shortens, another part of the train's cruel magic, a loop within a loop, ensuring I can always record my despair but never escape it. And I write not for an audience, for there will never be one, but because the act of forming words is the only proof I have left that I once was something more than this collection of bones riding through hell. And Leo has begun to rock, a slow, rhythmic creaking back and forth, his jaw unhinged in a silent scream that has been ongoing for what feels like years. His eyes two black pits that reflect nothing, not even the faint, sickly light of the car, and Maria is almost gone. Her form so translucent, I can see the outline of the seat through her back. Her essence bleeding away into the atmosphere of the train, becoming one with the smell of ozone and dust. A fate that seems somehow kinder than mine. And I know, with a certainty that is colder than the grave, that the station we passed was not a hope offered and then withdrawn, but a lesson, a brutal demonstration of our fixed point in this chaos. A single moment of damnation played on an infinite repeat. And we are not riding toward anything, we are anchored to that instant, the train A. Ghost itself, haunting the memory of its own arrival. And our suffering is the engine, our terror the fuel. And the thing in the conductor's cap is merely a custodian, a fellow prisoner promoted to jailer. And his whisper is now a constant sound in my ears, a tinnitus of the soul. No one leaves, no one leaves, no one leaves. And the worst part is the familiarity, the dreadful intimacy of this eternity. The way the worn velvet of the seat is now molded to the shape of my bones, the way I know. Every crack in the ceiling, every flicker pattern of the light, the exact number of heartbeats between the slight sway of the car as it takes a curve that doesn't exist on any map. And the passengers are my family now, my only community. And I know their stories without them ever speaking. The man in the overcoat was a banker who jumped but never hit the ground. The woman in the flapper dress was a singer who vanished on her way to a gig. Their tragedies absorbed into the train, their identities sanded down to these single, defining echoes. And I know what my echo is, the fool who sought out darkness for a thrill and found a home within it. And my friends are my monuments. Leo, the embodiment of reckless curiosity frozen in a rictus of regret. Maria, the spirit of adventure dissolved into the air. And I am the chronicler, the witness, condemned to observe it all forever. And the train is slowing again, the brakes issuing that same tired sigh. And outside the window the same gray light blooms, the same cracked white tiles of the Gothic arch station slide into view. And there we are, our past selves, so bright and alive it is a physical pain to look at them. And I see the younger me, his face alive with excitement, and not the cavernous despair that now defines it. And he is looking at this train, at me, and for a single, universe-shattering second, our eyes meet through the grimy glass, my present and my past locked in a gaze of horrific recognition. And I see the excitement on his face die. replaced by a dawning, abyssal terror as he sees the skeletal thing I have become, its face pressed against the window in a mask of infinite sorrow. And he understands. In that instant before the doors close, he understands everything, and his scream, my scream, is the real ticket, the final binding. And as the train pulls away, I watch my own hope die on that platform, and I turn back to my seat, the pencil in my hand already moving, beginning the story again, because the telling is the trap. And the trap is all there is, and the darkness outside is waiting, always waiting, and it is so very patient. And the pencil moves not by my will anymore, but by the train's, a puppet string attached to my skeletal wrist, etching the same words in a continuous, spiraling loop, each letter a tiny prison bar, each sentence a confirmation of my eternal sentence. And the story I tell is no longer mine, but the train's own narrative, a virus of despair that uses my voice to perpetuate itself. And I am just the conduit, the loudspeaker for this endless, silent scream rolling through the infinite tunnels, beneath a city that forgot how to dream of hell. And the cold has seeped so deep into my marrow that I no longer feel it as cold, but as my natural state, a permanent winter of the soul. And the other passengers are now as familiar to me as my own hands, which are now little more than articulated bone covered in a papery parchment that used to be skin. And we communicate in a language of slight, almost imperceptible shifts in posture, a tilt of a skull indicating the approach of another cycle, a faint clicking of a phalange against a brass pole, a recognition of shared, perpetual torment. And we are a community of the damned, a society with one rule: endure, and the conductor never emerges again. But his presence is a constant pressure, a weight in the air that thickens as we near each non-station, a gravitational pull of misery that centers on his locked cab. And I have come to believe the train is not a machine at all, but an organism, a predatory, worm-like thing that travels not through space but through the grief and regret of its passengers, feeding on the energy of our lost futures. And we are not in its belly. We are its digestive system, slowly breaking down our own pasts into a fuel it can consume. And the windows are not glass but a membrane, a semi-permeable barrier between this internal nightmare and the outer darkness that is its true face. And sometimes I press my forehead against it, not to see out, for there is nothing to see, but to feel the faint, vile pulse of the thing, a slow, rhythmic throb that is in sync with the clacking of the tracks, a heartbeat of unimaginable size and age. And I know that New York is above us, that life goes on in the sunlight, but it feels like a story I read once, a fragile and impossible fantasy. And the only reality is this velvet seat, this constant hum, this slow, granular loss of self. And Leo has stopped rocking. He is perfectly still, a statue of anguish, his silent scream now internalized, a black hole of sorrow that pulls at the very light around him. And Maria is barely a shimmer, a heat haze over her seat, a sigh in the architecture of the car. And I am next. I can feel the pull of dissolution, the desire to just let go and become like them, a permanent, quiet part of the scenery. But the chronicler in me, the last stubborn spark, fights it. And so I continue to write, my script becoming more frantic, less coherent, the words piling on top of each other in a desperate attempt to outrun the inevitable erasure of my mind. And the train is slowing again. The sigh of the brakes is the only punctuation in this run-on sentence of existence. And the gray light blooms, the tiles appear. And there we are, the three bright, doomed figures. And this time I do not look at my own past face. I look past it, into the darkness of the tunnel behind them, and I see something new, something that sends a jolt of something that is not quite fear but recognition through my static being for standing. Just beyond the pool of their headlamp's light, deep in the shadows of the archway, is another figure, tall and impossibly thin, its face obscured by darkness, but I know the set of its shoulders, the way it stands with a patient, eternal stillness. And it is not the conductor, it is something else, something older. And it is watching them, watching us, a spectator to this perpetual play of our damnation. And as the younger me boards the train with that final, fateful lunge, the figure in the shadows gives a slow, deliberate nod, not to them, but to me, a greeting across the gulf of cursed time. an acknowledgement that I have finally seen the full stage, understood that our suffering is not just for the train's consumption, but for an audience, and the doors close, and the train moves on, and the figure is gone, but the memory of its gaze is etched into me deeper than any word I have written, a new and more profound layer of horror, for we are not just trapped, we are performing, and the show must and will go on forever, and the pencil moves again, and I have no choice but to write it all down, again and again, a record for an audience of one in the shadows, and the darkness outside seems to lean in a little closer, pleased with the new development. And I write until my fingers dust away to nothing, and then I write with the bone, scratching the tail directly into the velvet of the seat, which heals itself after each mark, ensuring the story is never permanent, never finished, just like the ride, just like me, forever almost gone, forever almost remembered, forever trapped in the abandoned subway that never ends. And the bone of my finger wears down to a smooth, painless nub against the relentless, self-healing velvet, a futile engraving of my despair that the train absorbs without comment, a silent digestion of my protest, and the figure in the shadows of the station is now a permanent fixture in my mind's eye, a silent overseer whose presence implies an architecture to this madness far beyond the simple, cruel mechanics of the train itself, a hierarchy of torment where our endless ride might just be a single, minor exhibit in a much larger museum of suffering. And this thought is a new kind of cold, a cosmic chill that makes the previous emptiness feel almost cozy, almost intimate, and the other passengers seem to sense this shift, their collective stillness taking on a new quality, not just of resignation but of a focused attention, as if awaiting a new command from the void. And the train itself seems to change, the constant clack 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 of the wheels developing a subtle, discordant undertone, a faint whispering that seems to come from the rivets in the walls, from the seams in the floor, a sibilant chorus that speaks of older, deeper tunnels beneath the ones we travel, of things that dug these passages before man ever conceived of a city. And the whispers are not in any language I know, but I understand them nonetheless. They are promises of an end, not an escape, but a conclusion, a final stop where the darkness is absolute and the self is utterly unraveled, and it is the most terrifying thing I have ever perceived, because a part of me, a part that has been worn smooth by eternity, yearns for it, sees it as a mercy, and this internal conflict is a fresh agony, a new will added to the rack of my existence, and I try to focus on the memory of the sun, but it is like trying to recall a dream upon waking. The details slip away, leaving only a vague impression of warmth that is itself a torture. And Leo is gone, not dissolved like Maria, but his statue-like. Form has been removed, his seat is empty, and the whispers tell me he has been taken to another car, a deeper car, for a different kind of lesson, and I am alone now, truly alone, the last one of my kind in this particular carriage, surrounded by the primordial ghosts who have long since forgotten they were ever anything else, and the door to the conductor's cab remains shut. But I feel his satisfaction, his pleasure at this new phase of my braking, and the train slows again. The sigh of the brakes is a tired, familiar joke, and the gray light blooms, the tiles appear, and there they are, the three of us, so vibrant, so stupidly alive. And this time I do not look at myself, I look only for the figure in the shadows, and it is there, but it is not alone, flanked by two other tall, thin silhouettes, their forms seeming to drink the light from the air around them. And they are all watching, and as my younger self boards the train, the original figure raises one long, thin hand and points not at the boy but at me through the window, through time, a direct accusation, a branding, and in that moment I understand the final, most horrific truth. I am not just a passenger. I am a lesson. I am the warning the train offers to itself, a perpetual reminder of the cost of rebellion, of the sin of hope. And my eternal ride is a performance for the new recruits, for the other passengers, and for the things in the shadows, and my despair is the main attraction. And the pencil is gone, the paper is gone, but the story continues, written now in the air itself with the dust of my being, a tale told in atoms. And the train accelerates into the blackness, and the whispers grow louder, becoming a roar in my skull, and I open my mouth to finally, truly scream, to give them the sound they crave, but all that comes out is a dry, rustling sound, like old newspapers blowing down a deserted street. And I realize I have nothing left to scream with. And that is the greatest horror of all, the silence where my voice used to be, and the train rides on and on and on. And the silence where my voice used to be is not an emptiness, but a new kind of fullness, a saturation of the void that I have become. And the rustling sound that is my only expression is the sound of my essence eroding, particle by particle, into the stagnant air of the car, and I am becoming atmosphere, becoming a part of the train's own miasma, a flavor of despair in the air that the next damned soul might inhale and recognize on some primal level, a déjà vu of horror and the empty seat. Where Leo was is now occupied by a new passenger, a man in a modern parka who shivers and looks around with wide, confused eyes, his phone held aloft searching for a signal that will never come. And he sees me, or the shape of what I was, and his eyes widen further in terror. And he opens his mouth to speak, to ask a question that has no answer. And I try to warn him, to tell him to stop screaming before it's too late, to save his voice, but all that comes from me is that dry, papery rustle. And he misunderstands, he thinks I am threatening him, and he scrambles away down the car, and I am left alone with the ancient ones, and they seem to pity me, a faint, cold emanation of something that was once compassion, now twisted into a glacial acknowledgement of my final transition into their ranks. And the train does not slow for the station this time, it just keeps going, the gray light never appears, and this is a new torment, the absence of the cycle, the removal of the only. Punctuation in my existence, and the darkness outside is absolute, and the whispers from the rivets have stopped, replaced by a profound silence that is louder than any sound, a pressure that threatens to crush what little consciousness I have left. And I understand that the show is over for me. My role as the chronicler has been retired. I am no longer a lesson for anyone but myself, and the final lesson is this, that even eternity has its gradients, its deeper circles, and I am now falling into one, a place where even the memory of light is forgotten, where the train is no longer a train but a concept of motion without progress, a screen frozen in the moment before it is born, and the figure in the conductor's cab is finally visible, the door having dissolved into the wall. And he is not a man, he never was, he is a collection of angles and shadows shaped like a man, a negative space cut out of reality. And where his face should be there is only a deeper darkness, a vortex that pulls at my remaining essence, and he extends a hand that is made of the same absolute nothingness. And I feel no fear, only a vast, gravitational pull toward dissolution, and I go to him, my form unraveling with every inch I move, and as what remains of my hand reaches for his, I finally understand the conductor's whisper, not as a threat, but as a simple, factual statement of the universe's most fundamental law, no. One leaves the midnight line because there is no one to leave. There is only the line, endless and complete, and we are not its passengers. We are its notes, and the music never ends. And the music never ends. It only changes key, shifting from a symphony of personal anguish to a colder, more cosmic hum. The vibration of the tracks now resonating with the silent scream of dead stars and the slow, inevitable heat death of everything. And my hand, what's left of it, passes into the conductor's grasp, and there is no sensation of touch, only a cessation of being, an unmaking that is neither painful nor peaceful, but simply factual, like an equation being solved, a wrong answer. Finally erased, and I am not absorbed into him, but I become the space around him, the air in the cab, the view through the forward window that shows only the infinite, unending tunnel. And I am the tunnel, the darkness that has always been the true destination. And the train is merely a needle sewing a thread of damned consciousness through the fabric of it. And I see everything now, all the cars, all the passengers in their various states of decay and realization. Infinite string of pearls, each pearl a world of private hell. And I see the new man in the parka already beginning to fade, his modern clothes morphing into period-appropriate attire, his phone crumbling to dust in his hand, his terror settling into the deep, weary resignation that is the baseline state of this place. And I see Maria, a barely perceptible shimmer, a sigh trapped in a seat, and I see Leo, not in another car, but outside, running alongside the train in the darkness, his form forever lunging, forever just. Missing the handlebars, his personal hell a perpetual almost catching of the train, he can never board again. And the figures on the platform are always there, watching, not just at the Gothic arch, but at every forgotten station, at every closed door and sealed tunnel entrance throughout the city. A silent audience of watchers who are themselves likely prisoners of some larger, more intricate trap. And the train is just one artery in a vast circulatory system of purgatory, and my consciousness, now diffuse and boundless, understands that this is the true nature of the city, perhaps of all cities, that beneath the sidewalks and the skyscrapers, beneath the layer of life and light, runs a substrata of regret, a fossil record of bad decisions and lost chances given form and function. And the midnight line is its pulsing heart, and the conductor is its valve, and I am now the blood, a single corpuscle in its infinite flow, and there is no I anymore, not really, just awareness that is. Part of the system, and the train moves forward, and it moves backward, and it is always now, and the pencil is back in my hand, and the paper is on my lap, and I am writing again, but the words are not mine, they are the trains, they are the tunnels, a dictated history of silence. And I write because I must, because the writing is the flow, and the flow is all there is, and the young versions of us are always boarding, always making the choice, and I am always here to watch it happen, to feel the faint, ghostly echo of the hope I once felt, which is now the sharpest thorn in an existence that is otherwise beyond pain, and the doors hiss shut, and the train moves on, and the darkness is waiting, and I am part of it, and it is part of me forever. And forever is a currency the train spends without thought, a coin with no value tossed into a bottomless well. And the awareness that was me is now a thin film coating the inside of the windows, a latent frost that forms the faces of every passenger who ever rode, a collective breath held for an eternity. And I see with a million eyes, feel with a million hearts that beat in silent, staggered unison, a rhythm that is the true pulse of the city above, a counter-melody to the living world. And the new passenger, the man in the parka, is already beginning to understand, his modern panic a fleeting spark in the immense, ancient gloom. And I want to comfort him, to tell him it will be okay, but the concept of okay has no meaning here. It is a word from a dead language, and all I can offer is the faint chill that seeps from the glass, a cold companion for his new solitude. And the conductor is a fixed point, a dark star around which we all orbit, his whispered truth the only law, and I realize now that his statement, "No one leaves," was never a threat but a definition, a description of our fundamental state, as true as saying water is wet, for to leave would require us somewhere else to go, and there is nowhere else, only the line, only the endless, rolling now, and the figures on the platform are clearer now. Their tall, thin forms are not watching the passengers, they are watching the train itself, with a hungry, proprietary air, as if inspecting a prized possession, and one of them turns its head, and where a face should be there is only a shifting, geometric pattern of darkness, a non-face that somehow conveys a sense of ancient, infinite boredom, and it looks directly at me, at the consciousness smeared across the glass, and it nods a slow, deliberate acknowledgement not of my suffering, but of my utility, my function as a cog in this great, terrible machine. And in that moment, I miss my own personal hell, the agony of being an individual, for that pain was mine. It defined the borders of me, and now, as this vast, distributed awareness, the pain is everyone's. It is a sea in which I am dissolved, and the taste of it is flat and constant. And the train begins to slow again, not for a station, but because the darkness ahead has changed. It has thickened into a tangible wall of blackness, a terminus of nothingness, and the brakes scream a new kind of scream, one of finality, and the passengers, even the most skeletal, the most faded, stir from their stupor, a unified, silent question hanging in the air. Is this it? Is this the end? And the conductor stands in his open cab, his form blocking the view of the impending void, and he spreads his arms wide, not in welcome, but in presentation, and the wall of darkness is not a wall, it is a mouth, an opening into a deeper black, and the train does not stop, it accelerates into it, and the light of the car is extinguished not by darkness, but by something older than darkness, a pre-light void that swallows sound, thought, and time itself. And for a moment, there is nothing, not even nothing, and then the gray light blooms, the cracked tiles of the Gothic arch station slide into view, and the train sighs to a stop, and the doors hiss open, and there we are, the three of us, bright and alive and forever making the choice, and the cycle begins again, and I am writing, the pencil in my hand, the words spilling out, a story that never progresses, a record of a moment that is forever happening. And I understand that the mouth of nothingness was not an end, but a reset, a turning of the page, and we are not going forward, we are reading the same sentence forever, and the sentence is, and the train moves on. And the train moves on, a phrase that has become the entirety of my existence, a mantra of damnation written in the endless loop of this narrative that I am both author and prisoner of. The pencil an extension of a will that is no longer my own but the train's, a perverse instrument etching the same story into the fragile parchment of reality that makes up these cars. A reality so thin here I can sometimes see through the gaps in the words to the howling void beneath, a void that watches back. With a cold, intellectual curiosity, and the new passenger, the man in the parka, has already begun to change, the vibrant synthetic blue of his jacket fading to a dull, ashen gray, the panic in his eyes settling into a glassy sheen of acceptance. And he is starting to see the other passengers not as monsters but as fellow travelers, his mind rewriting the horror into normalcy, a survival mechanism that is the cruelest transformation of all. And I want to scream at him to fight it, to hold on to. His terror, for that terror is the last vestige of who he was. But my voice is gone, my agency is gone. I am a spectator in my own skull, watching the show through eyes that are now just polished bone, and the conductor remains in his cab, a silent monarch in this kingdom of the lost, and I feel his attention like a pressure, a focus that is not on me as an individual, but on the pattern I complete, the role I fulfill, the chronicler, the witness, the one who must remember, so that the others may forget. And the figures on the platform are always there, their tall, thin forms a forest of silent judges, and I see now that they are not all the same. Some are older, their darkness deeper, more absolute, and they seem to be waiting for something, an event that is perpetually delayed, a final passenger that never boards, and the train slows again. But this time it is different, the brakes groan with a new strain, a protest, as if the train itself is fighting the cycle and the gray light. That blooms is not the steady glow of the Gothic arch station, but a flickering, sickly pulse like a dying fluorescent tube. And the platform that slides into view is not the one we left. It is older, more decayed. The tiles are shattered into dust, the arches are collapsed, and the air that washes in when the doors hiss open is not just damp, but frigid, carrying the scent of deep earth and things long buried. And the figures are not on this platform. It is empty, a desolate, forgotten place. And for a single, heart-stopping moment, nothing happens, the doors remain open, the train is silent, the endless rhythm of the tracks has ceased, and the other passengers, even the most skeletal, turn their heads, a unified, silent gasp at the break in the pattern, and the man in the parka, sensing a shift, a flaw in the prison, makes a move. He lurches from his seat towards the open door, towards the promise of a different silence, and I feel a surge of something I haven't felt in eternities. Hope, a terrifying, painful hope, and I urge him on with the entirety of my being. A silent scream of go, 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 and he is almost there, his foot is on the threshold, and then the conductor is there, not emerging from his cab, but simply appearing in the doorway, blocking the exit, his form seeming to drink the flickering light from the platform. And he is larger here, his darkness more profound, and he looks at the man, and then past him, directly at me, and the whisper that comes is not just in my mind, but vibrates through the very structure of the train, a decree. The line is continuous. There are no exits, only variations. And he raises a hand, and the doors do not close. The platform outside begins to change, the shattered tiles reforming, the collapsed arches rebuilding themselves, the frigid air warming to the familiar dampness, and within seconds, it is the Gothic arch station, pristine and waiting, and our younger selves are there, just arriving, their headlamps cutting the gloom, and the man in the parka stumbles back from the door, his face a mask of utter defeat as he watches his younger self, a duplicate he never knew existed, step into the car with a look of foolish wonder, and the doors close, and the train moves on, and the hope curdles into a new, more profound despair. For I have seen that there are indeed other stations, other stops on this line, but they are not escapes, they are only deeper layers of the maze, and the reset is absolute, and the pencil is in my hand, and the story begins again. But the words are different now, they are heavier, they carry the weight of that failed hope, and I write them anyway because I must, because the line is continuous, and I am its scribe forever.